What if everything you believe online isn't actually a choice, but a piece of code written 150 years ago?
That is a terrifying way to start a Saturday, Seth. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Haanaan Wins. I am feeling incredibly electric today. The storm from the other night has finally cleared, leaving this weird, bright, high-pressure stillness. It's wonderful to be back in the studio, even if I'm a little bit caffeinated.
I'm dialed in from home today, just enjoying the quiet of my study. It's a bit of a peaceful contrast to the chaos in the wires lately. Did you see the news about the blue marlin? Over 1,200 pounds caught off the East Coast.
Honestly, I'm still stuck on the capybaras in Brazil, just chilling while the legislature crashes around them. I need that level of zen for my yoga practice. I am, however, a little bummed that Paco and Jane aren't here to witness the marlin or the capybaras.
Paco is currently deep in a ritualistic argument with a local tarot enthusiast about whether certain cards are trending, and Jane is busy investigating the structural integrity of that new ballroom project in DC. She says if she's going to analyze architecture, she's going to do it properly.
So, no comedy and no reality checks for us today. Just us and the books.
Exactly. And today we're stepping away from the digital noise to look at the man who actually built the blueprint for modern belief. We're diving into Christopher McIntosh's Eliphas Levi, the revival of French occultism.
We're looking at Levi as the original engineer, the man who took fragmented folklore and turned it into a structured, programmable system, like the first true architect of a spiritual algorithm.
Let's open the archives and see how he coded the occult. So, I've got the text open. We're looking at the preface and introduction by McIntosh. And before we even get to the meat of it, he sets the stage. He talks about how occult movements are like groundwater.
Groundwater? That's a heavy image.
Right. He says they move beneath the surface of history, and occasionally they just burst through. And when they do, they wash up strange and exotic fish onto the shore.
Well, I hope we aren't the exotic fish today, but I love that. It implies that the weird stuff isn't an accident, it's just part of the natural flow of what's already there, just hidden.
Exactly. And he identifies our fish for today as Alphonse Louis Constant, better known as Eliphas Levi. But look how he frames the context. He's talking about this massive, fertile, esoteric dawn in France. He's listing names. Papus, Peladan, all. These figures that built this whole ecosystem.
It's like he's describing a software update for the entire culture of the time. Like, the old folklore was the legacy code, and Levi came in to rewrite the architecture.
That's exactly the angle we're taking. And speaking of architecture, look at what he says about Levi's actual writing style. This is where it gets messy. McIntosh admits that Levi's manuscripts were, an inspired but often careless flow.
Wait, so he wasn't some organized scholar?
Not at all. He says the books are often incoherent, wordy, poorly structured, and riddled with errors. He basically says Levi just let it out. He didn't even bother to proofread.
That is so frustrating. I mean, I love a good flow state. You think you know that from my writing sessions, but if I turned in a book of magic that was just a typo-ridden stream of consciousness, I'd be in trouble.
Yeah, but that's the thing. McIntosh argues that despite the mess, the ideas were so powerful, so revolutionary, that they stuck. They were captivating enough to survive the lack of editing.
It's like a viral meme. It doesn't matter if the grammar is bad. If the concept hits, it spreads.
Precisely. And that brings us to the most famous piece of code Levi left behind. McIntosh brings up the Baphomet illustration.
Oh man, the goat with the weird features. Everyone thinks that's just, straight up satanic.
Right, and McIntosh is very careful to correct that. He says it's often mistakenly interpreted as a satanic image. He claims that Baphomet is actually a symbol of the balance of opposites. It's a visual equation. You've got the masculine and feminine, the earthly and the celestial, all mapped out.
So it's not a demon, it's a diagram.
Exactly. Look at the details he points out. The goat represents the dense earthly nature, but it has angelic wings for the heavenly. It has a female breast, but a male phallus. He even mentions the solve and coagula written on the hands.
Solve and coagula. Dissolve and coagulate. That sounds so much more scientific. Like a chemical process.
That's the point. He's using these symbols to explain how to work with what he calls astral light. He describes this light as an invisible, all-pervading fluid that can be imprinted with thoughts.
So, like a cosmic cloud storage?
Honestly, that's a perfect way to put it. A medium where everything can be recorded. And the whole trick, according to Levi, is using the balance of these opposites to manipulate that medium.
It's wild. He's taking these ancient heavy concepts and turning them into something that feels almost programmable.
He really is. And it's even more interesting when you see how people distorted it later. Mackintosh points out how a later artist, Oswald Wirth, took that same Baphomet and turned it into a grotesque caricature of the devil, changing the hands and the wings.
So the algorithm was corrupted by bad updates.
Precisely. The original code was about balance, but the later versions turned it into pure horror. Okay, moving into the actual text now. We're in chapter 1, titled The Revival of Magic, and man, Mackintosh doesn't waste time. He starts with this absolute legend.
Let me guess, another exotic fish from the groundwater?
Exactly. He tells this story from a French countess's memoirs about a man named the Count of Saint George or Saint-Germain. This guy shows up in 1720s Paris, and he's such a main character. He speaks every language, plays the piano like a master, paints with brilliant color effects, and wears diamonds on literally everything. His shoes, his snuff boxes, his watches.
Okay, so he's basically the 18th century version of an influencer with a massive, mysterious budget.
Right. And here's the kicker, the part that makes him feel like a glitch in the Matrix. The Countess meets him, and she remembers seeing him 50 years prior. She says, "The Saint Germain I knew was 45, and you look exactly the same age right now."
No way.
He just smiles and says, "Madam, I am very old." And she basically calls him the devil because he's clearly not aging.
That is such a vibe. It's that classic immortal wanderer trope. But wait, does the author take this at face value?
Not at all. He uses it to make a much bigger point. He says that even though this was a rational, ultra-rational France, the human mind cannot tolerate a lack of a rational belief. He says nature abhors a vacuum, and so does the human psyche. When the old religious structures started to crack, people were desperate for new, colorful myths.
So the algorithm of belief was searching for new inputs because the old ones were failing?
Exactly, and he links this to the social chaos. He mentions that the occult revival happened when the old order was literally tearing at the seams right around the French Revolution. He compares it to the instability in Rome during the time of Julius Caesar. When the political structure breaks, the spiritual structure goes wild.
It makes sense. If you don't know where you stand with the government, you start looking for answers in the stars or in secret societies.
Wait, hold on. I'm having a bit of a technical issue here. My headset it's cutting out. 1 second.
Oh, it went totally silent for a second. Are you okay?
Okay, let me grab the spare one from my desk. I think the battery's dying. Okay, how's this? Can you hear me?
Crystal clear. You didn't lose your Scholar magician aura there.
Barely. Anyway, where was I? Right, the chaos. Mackintosh says the most strange fish to come on out of this period actually came from Freemasonry.
Because that's where the real coding was happening. The structure, the lodges, the hierarchy.
Right. He says the most interesting part of the 19th century occult scene was almost entirely a product of the Masonic movement. And he introduces another heavy hitter, Martinists and Rosicrucians.
Oh, I recognize that name from our previous notes. The founder of the Order of Knight Mason Elect Priests, right?
Yes, and his backstory is just as murky as Saint Germain's. People claimed he was a Spanish Jew or a traveler from the East who learned magic in Egypt or China. But look at what Mackintosh says about his actual method. He wasn't just sitting around reading books. He was performing rituals that were part Catholic Mass, part Renaissance magic.
That sounds intense.
It was. He believed he was communicating with celestial beings. He even claimed he could heal his wife through magic. But the most chilling part is the story of a priest named Fournier. He was in the middle of a massive religious crisis, totally lost his faith, and then he meets Pasquale.
And let me guess, Pasquale gives him the patch for his crisis?
Precisely. The text says Pasquale told him, "You should come and see us. You will open a book, look at the first page, then the middle, then the end, and you will know everything it contains." And then he points to people walking on the street and tells the priest, "These people don't know why they walk, but you will know why you walk."
Oh, wow. That is incredibly predatory and incredibly seductive at the same time. It's like being offered the source code to reality.
It's the hook. And Macintosh follows this with the actual mechanics of these rituals. They involved 11-hour fasts, specific planetary alignments, and drawing circles on the floor.
It's all so physical, so much more visceral than just thinking positive thoughts.
Exactly. They were trying to manipulate the astral light through physical discipline. It's very much the engineering we talked about at the start. They were trying to program the unseen. Okay, we're moving deeper into the manual now. We've talked about the why, the social chaos, the need for new myths, but now Macintosh starts describing the how. And honestly, Emily, if you saw this on a TikTok ritual aesthetic video, you'd think it was a movie set.
Oh, I am so here for a cinematic ritual. What are we talking about? Candles and incense?
Much more. He's describing a specific method used by the Order of the Elect Cohen. It's incredibly sensory. The adept carries the small clay dish of warm coals, and they're dropping this specific heavy mixture onto them. We're talking saffron, frankincense, sulfur, white and black poppy seeds, cloves, cinnamon, mastic, even mushroom spores.
That is a lot of ingredients. That's a whole olfactory assault. It sounds like they were trying to create a physical atmosphere so thick you could almost touch it.
Exactly. And the uniform is just as intense. Black shirt, black pants, black stockings. But then they layer on this long white robe with red edges, a blue ribbon, a black ribbon, a red sash, and a green sash.
It sounds like a very high-stakes version of a color-coded organization chart.
Right? But then the actual programming starts. He describes this massive floor drawing a complex geometric sector with a triangle, a circle, a sanctuary circle. And the instructions for the ritual are so precise, it's almost like a script.
Like a command mine?
Exactly. You have to start at midnight, precisely at the 12 strokes of the clock. You take your shoes off, you move a candle, you lie face down for 6 minutes, and then you start reciting these names, repeating them 3 times each, using this specific formula. In whichever day I shall invoke thee, hear me swiftly.
Hear me swiftly. That is such a desperate, beautiful plea. It's more than, hey, let me know you're there. It's respond now, because the window is closing.
And it's more than just calling something in. He shows the other side of the code. There's this work of the equinox where they actually command demons. He quotes this terrifying address to Satan, Beelzebub, Leviathan, calling them mighty beings of lawlessness, disorder, and abomination.
Okay, that escalated quickly. We went from saffron and cinnamon to I bind you in your terrible abode very fast.
It's intense. But, and this is the part that ties back to everything we said earlier, Macintosh makes a crucial distinction. He says the goal wasn't to summon specific spirits for personal gain. He quotes Arthur Edward Waite saying the whole point was much higher, to establish a connection with what Pasquale called the active and intelligent cause.
So it wasn't about summoning a demon to do my laundry. It was about resyncing with the source code of the universe.
Precisely. They were trying to bypass the individual ego to hit the primary driver of reality. But, of course, the user agreement for this connection was incredibly strict.
Let me guess, no meat?
Close, no blood, no fat, no kidneys of any animal, and specifically, no eating the flesh of domestic pigeons. And they had to practice sexual abstinence and extreme self-control. It was a high-maintenance way to live.
I mean, if you want to talk to the active and intelligent cause, I guess you can't exactly be living a life of total indulgence. You have to be optimized.
That's a great way to put it, optimized. And this leads us to the next big figure in the text, Antoine Joseph Pernety. If Pasquale was the architect, Pernety was the one who took these heavy, complex rituals and turned them into a widespread mythology.
The guy who believed all ancient myths were just allegories for hermetic principles?
Exactly. He looked at Egypt and Greece and saw a highly hidden layer of instruction beneath the stories. He even created his own hermetic ceremony with 6 different degrees of initiation, things like Knight of the Golden Key and Knight of the Golden Fleece.
It's so much more organized than the careless flow of Levi. He's building these distinct, tiered levels of access.
Right, and it was all based on alchemy. He used symbols like a burning star, a moon, and a sun to represent the stages of decomposition, purification, and finally, the red substance, the source of everything good. It's all very structured.
It's like he was building a ladder, one rung at a time, through different levels of esoteric knowledge.
And the wildest part? The lore doesn't end with the books. Mackintosh tells this story about a priest, Fournier, who was literally haunted by the ghosts of his dead mentors and parents. He claimed he heard the voice of the deceased Pasquale speaking to him through a closed door, even though the man had been dead for 2 years.
That is genuinely creepy. That's a full-on haunting.
It is. It's the exotic fish surfacing in the most unsettling way possible. It really shows that for these people, the veil wasn't just thin, it was practically non-existent. They were living in a world where the past was constantly, loudly, walking through the garden.
All this talk of ghosts is making me jittery. I need to move my body for a second, or I'm going to start looking over my shoulder.
Agreed. Let's take a quick breather and grab some water before we get too deep into the Avignon shadows. Okay, let me just clear my throat. I'm dialing in from the home office today. Okay, so I'm dialing in from the home office today. A bit more quiet than the studio, but the rain is hitting the window just right.
I love that. It's cozy. Though honestly, I'm still a little bit spooked after that ritual Paco did the other night. The wind was just aggressive.
It was intense. But hey, speaking of things being aggressive or, well, transformative, we are diving right into the heart of the 19th century spiritual algorithm. We're looking at how this whole modern occult scene wasn't just random magic, but a deliberate engineered reconstruction of old secrets.
And today we're looking at the blueprints. We're moving through the French Revival, this era, where everything from alchemy to hypnotism was being coded into a new system.
Right, and the book starts us in Avignon. There's this group called the Illuminés d'Avignon. It's a massive network of masons, doctors, and professors.
It sounds like a much more organized version of the secret society trope we see in movies.
Exactly. And Mackintosh points to the specific manuscript from one of their leaders, Dr. Bouge. It lays out the actual programming for the great work literally. Look at how he describes the alchemy here. He says you take 10 parts philosophical mercury and 1 part gold, seal it in a vessel, and just wait.
Wait, he says it turns blacker than the blackness of blessed Raymond Lully.
Yeah, the head of the raven. But then, after 40 days, it shifts. It goes through this stage of slags, then turns white, whiten the mallow, it says, and then you get this beautiful swirling peacock's tail of colors.
That sounds less like a chemistry experiment and enough like a psychedelic trip.
It's meant to be. It's about stages of transformation, and the goal? A final, intense heat that turns everything red after 9 months. It's a precise, timed process. It's an algorithm for matter.
It's wild how much structure they were trying to impose on the universe. But then the book moves from the laboratory to the courtroom and the theater, like Cagliostro.
Oh, man, Cagliostro. The guy was a walking piece of performance art. He claimed he'd been initiated into Egyptian mysteries and could literally turn base metals into gold.
He even claimed he was 2,000 years old.
I mean, talk about an inflated ego. But the fascinating part is how he brought women into the ritual space the high society ladies of Paris attending ceremonies at the Temple of Isis. He was making the esoteric fashionable.
It's like he was the first influencer, but with much higher stakes.
Speaking of stakes, we have to talk about Mesmer. This is where the science meets the magic. He proposed animal magnetism, this idea of a universal fluid that connects everything. Planets, tides, even our own bodies.
Right, and he used these huge oak barrels with iron rods sticking out of them. Patients would sit in the dark, holding hands, trying to circulate this fluid.
It sounds totally absurd, but look at what he's claiming. He says this fluid is everywhere so that no void remains. It's the original cloud computing of the soul. He believed he could use it to trigger a crisis to cure disease.
It's so much like the digital networks we use today, everything interconnected, no gaps in the field. Even if the fluid turned out to be a placebo.
Even the medical faculties in Vienna and Paris rejected him. They called it a fake, but you can't deny the vibe it created. It set the stage for everything else.
Like the poet Cazada. Now, that is where it gets truly dark.
This is the part that actually gave me chills when I read it. Cazot was part of the Order of the Elect Cohen, and at a dinner in 1788, he basically predicted the French Revolution.
And he didn't just say things will get bad. He went person by person.
Yeah, he told one guest he'd die in a prison cell from poison. He told another, a famous aristocrat, that he'd die by his own hand, cutting his veins 22 times.
That is terrifying.
It gets worse. He told the astronomer Bailey that he'd die on the scaffold at the hands of a mob. And every single one of it, every single prediction came true within 6 years. The revolution arrived and the guillotine took them all, exactly as he said.
It's like he wasn't just predicting the future, he was reading the code of the coming chaos.
Exactly, and that's the point. This whole era, the alchemists, the hypnotists, the prophets, they were all trying to decode a world that was about to explode. It's like they were trying to predict the exact trajectory of a falling object before it even left the hand.
It's chilling, Seth. Truly, we just talked about Kazode predicting the deaths of aristocrats, but now we're seeing Cagliostro doing the same thing with, what? Numerology?
Yeah, look at this. He's calculating. He takes the numbers and the names of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, runs the algorithm, and boom death on the scaffold. He even predicts the Princess de Lamballe will be killed by bandits on a specific street.
And the book says it all came true. But then he goes even further, doesn't he? He predicts the rise of Napoleon.
He does. He says the successor to the Bourbons will be Napoleon Bonaparte. And get this, that he will end his particular life passing the circle of a melancholy island.
That is so incredibly specific. It's like he was reading the metadata of history.
But here's where we have to step back and look at the fallout. Because while these guys, Cagliostro, Cazotte, they weren't necessarily cheering for the revolution, the world saw them as the architects of it.
Right, because people need a villain. And if you can't blame the hunger or the politics, you blame the secret societies.
Exactly. And the book introduces this heavy hitter, Abbé Barruel. He's this priest who fled to England because the revolution destroyed everything in France. And he goes on this, well, it's a 4-volume crusade. He claims the revolution was a deliberate dark conspiracy by these occult groups.
He sounds intense. The author says his language is passionate and fervent.
Fervent is a polite way to put it. He calls the Jacobins a devouring sect that emerged from the earth to destroy the altar and the throne. He's basically painting a picture of a supernatural invasion of politics.
It's that classic us versus them coding. But wait, the book says even Barruel, in his own writing, admits he was actually invited into a Masonic lodge.
Yeah, he tells the story where he's at a dinner, and suddenly they're trying to initiate him. He's resisting, refusing to take oaths, and the venerable master of the lodge gets so angry he tells him, "Our sword will not be our sword if you are not ready to cut the throat of a traitor."
Okay, that is not a peace and love vibe. That is definitely not the equality and liberty we were talking about earlier.
And that's the tension. Barruel is using this terrifying imagery to prove his point, but the author is careful here. He notes that while Barruel's hatred might have stimulated his imagination to a high level of fantasy, there's a grain of truth in the chaos.
So the algorithm was working even if the conspiracy part was exaggerated?
Precisely. The book makes this brilliant point. It says that while there wasn't a secret plot to overthrow the monarchy in the way Barruel claimed, the Masonic lodges were acting like a laboratory.
A testing ground?
Exactly. Like a parliamentary committee for ideas, they took these abstract, lofty concepts, liberty, equality, democracy, and they didn't just talk about them, they practiced them. They turned philosophy into a practical political program.
So they weren't the ones pulling the trigger, but they were the ones building the guns out of ideas.
That's a perfect way to put it. They were paving the road to the revolution. They provided the intellectual infrastructure.
It's wild. The lodges were these unique social spaces where a nobleman and a merchant could actually sit at the same table as equals, while the rest of France was still stuck in this rigid old world hierarchy.
It was a crack in the foundation, and once that crack is there, the whole structure is vulnerable to the storm. So, we've established that the revolution was a massive, chaotic crack in the foundation. But look at how the Masons actually tried to code their way into the new system.
You mean like a software patch for the monarchy?
Exactly. The book mentions 1789, when the king calls the Estates General, and instead of just protesting in the streets, the Masons used these things called cahiers de doléances.
Lists of grievances.
Right, they were basically suggestion boxes posted at every polling station. And the author notes that the speed and persuasiveness of these lists shows the Masons had been preparing for a long time to spread their ideas of liberty and equality.
So they weren't just reacting to the revolution, they were preloading the data.
Precisely. But then the algorithm loses control. The revolution accelerates, the terror hits, and suddenly even the Masons can't stop the momentum. The book says the terror, especially the king's execution, was incompatible with the civilized creed of most Masons.
I mean, if you're a Mason and you value order and debate, watching a guillotine become the primary way to resolve political disputes, yeah, that's a system crash.
In that vacuum, it's where things get weird. The skepticism that birthed Masonry starts morphing into these strange new cults.
Like the cult of the Constitution?
Yeah, it's wild. The book describes it set by Marie-Joseph Saint-Pierre to replace Christ with the Constitution as the source of all goodness. They were literally trying to sanctify a legal document.
Imagine a mass where the priest just reads the Bill of Rights and then burns incense to the preamble?
It was even more theatrical than that. The author describes a ceremony on the Champ de Mars where 400 priests wore tricolor sashes over their robes, and Lafayette, the hero of the Revolution, was there, swearing oaths to the nation, the law, and the king.
It's such a mess of old and new. It's like someone trying to run Windows 11 on a steam engine.
And that mess is the hallmark of this era. The book calls it the paradox of reason, this uniquely French tendency to turn everything into a performance. They even had a cult of reason where they built a temple to philosophy and had actresses dressed in white and azurous playing the role of reason herself.
Wait, so they were literally playing dress up with the concept of logic?
They were. They had processions of girls marching around, saluting a flame of truth. It's highly irrational, but they were using religious forms to teach a secular idea.
It's ironic. They hated the old church, but they couldn't stop using the vibe of the church to make their new ideas stick.
Exactly. And after the terror, you get this period of religious anarchy. Enter the Teophilanthropies.
Now that name sounds like something from a bad sci-fi movie.
It's actually a pretty clever attempt at universal programming. Their goal was a religion with zero secrecy. No priests, no rituals, no exclusive vibes. They wanted a morality that every sect could agree on.
So like a much more boring version of everything?
Pretty much. Their code was just a mashup of the best bits of everything. They quote Confucius on pride, then use an ancient Indian sage to talk about social responsibility. It was a spiritual aggregator.
It's like a Wikipedia of morality.
And while it sounds naive, the book argues it was a massive precedent. It was the first real move toward religious syncretism, that way of blending everything together decades before the Theosophical Society ever showed up.
So even if the Teophilanthropies failed, they laid the groundwork for the spiritual melting pot of the later 19th century.
They did, but then the scene shifts again. We move from these universal group efforts to the individual influencers of the occult. And this brings us back to one name, Coeur de Javelin.
The guy who was wung up from Mesmer's mysticism?
The same. The book tells this great anecdote about him. He showed up to a doctor with a face yellow as quince and legs that had been cold as ice for 25 years. After a session with Mesmer, he claims he felt like a 15-year-old again.
Okay, I'll admit, if a treatment can make me feel 15 again, I'd be a believer too.
But here's the real kicker. His physical recovery isn't the important part, it's the text he wrote. He published this massive work, Le Monde Primitif, which was basically a claim that he had discovered a hidden ancient truth.
And let me guess he found it in a deck of cards?
He did. He claimed that the Tarot was actually a hidden repository of ancient Egyptian wisdom, an Egyptian book that had been hiding in plain sight, disguised as a mere set of fancy pictures.
That is such a classic move. It's a sacred code from the pharaohs.
And the magic worked. Even though other scholars mocked his superficial erudition, his claim about the tarot captured the entire imagination of the occult world. He turned a deck of playing cards into a cosmic library.
And he wasn't alone, right? The book mentions this guy, Eliot.
Ah, yes, the master of the rebranding. He was a math tutor in Paris who realized math didn't pay the bills, so he turned to card reading. He used an anagram of his name. Eliot became Attila.
A math tutor turned occultist. Now that is a pivot I can get behind.
He basically took Javelin's Egyptian theory and ran with it, adding astrology, alchemy, and chiromancy into the mix. He was the next step in the algorithm.
I need a quick stretch. My back is actually killing me from that last yoga flow.
Good idea. Let's take 5 and reset.
All right, we are back.
Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm dialing in from home today. It's a bit quieter here than the studio, but I've got the good tea.
And I've got the energy. We are leaning in. We are ready.
We really are. Today we're picking up the thread on our spiritual algorithm angle. We're looking at how the 19th century wasn't just a time of random superstition, but a period of intense, almost structural engineering of the occult.
Right, like someone was trying to write the source code for modern magic.
Exactly. And to do that, they needed tools, they needed systems. And that brings us to our next player, Atea.
Oh, I love this part. He's basically the guy who looked at a deck of playing cards and said, I can make this much more expensive and much more mysterious.
Precisely. The author, Mackintosh, points out that Attila actually invented his own terminology. He coined cartomancy and onomancy, which is divination by names. He wasn't just reading cards, he was branding the experience.
It's clever, it's very marketing.
But look how far he took the lore. He didn't just say, I'm good at cards. He claimed the tarot deck was composed in 17 BC by 17 magi working for 4 years. He even linked it to the Book of Thoth, written on gold plates near Memphis.
Wait, that sounds suspiciously like the kind of stuff we see in modern ancient wisdom tropes.
It is. And here's the catch. Mackintosh notes that Attila's earlier work, from 1770, was just about using simple playing cards. No mention of Egypt, no mention of Thoth. It was only after the publication of Le Monde Primitif, this huge, influential work that revived interest in Egypt, that he suddenly remembered this ancient golden connection.
So he was basically riding a trend. He saw the Egyptomania wave and updated his software to match the new hype.
Exactly. He saw the cultural shift and recoded his identity. And he wasn't just doing it for fame, he was doing it for the bottom line. Look at this price list Mackintosh digs up. This man had a literal menu for the soul.
Let me see that.
Answering questions on higher sciences, 3 livres. A reading of the cards, 2 to 4 livres. But if you want to name your genius their nature, their element, their protection, that'll be 12 livres.
And if you want to be a spiritual doctor on retainer, 30 livres a month. He was running a subscription model. He was the first person to put the Kabbalah on a subscription plan.
He really was. He took these incredibly dense, secret ideas, like the 72 names of God, the Shemam Forish, and made them accessible. He brought the esoteric into the commercial.
It's a huge shift. It's moving from the monastery to the marketplace.
But it wasn't all just playing cards and marketing. There was a more academic, if still wild, side. Like Fabre d'Olivet. He was this intense figure. He spent 20 years studying alone trying to synthesize all human knowledge.
That sounds exhausting.
It was. He claimed he could reconstruct the true grammar of Hebrew. He believed Hebrew had 3 levels: body, spirit, and soul. He even claimed he cured his own deafness by deciphering ancient temple texts.
Okay, so we have Atea, the brilliant marketer, and d'Olivet, the obsessive linguist. Both are trying to find a master key to the past.
They both are. But while they were building these linguistic and symbolic structures, another movement was physically hitting people: magnetism.
Ah, the animal magnetism era. The era of the vibe.
Exactly. The Marquis de Puységur. He actually had a method for mass magnetism. He tied clients to an old elm tree with a rope so they could all be magnetized at once.
An elm tree? That's not a ritual. That's a botanical waiting room.
It sounds absurd, but the author notes it worked for some. He had a peasant named Victor who could literally read the Marquis's thoughts during these sessions.
But then you have the pushback, the skeptics, the anti-magnetism crowd.
Right? The scientific community was not having it. The Medical Academy actually set up a commission to investigate. They even offered a 3,000 franc prize to anyone who could read without using their eyes.
And let me guess, nobody won the prize?
No one. And the Academy's conclusion was pretty brutal. They basically said, this transference of sensations isn't real. Stop bothering us. And the church was even worse, calling magnetizers victims of evil spirits.
So the more the scientists and priests attacked it, the more the followers went wild for it?
Exactly. It fueled the fanaticism. By 1840, you had these high society salons like Baron Dupotet's where it became almost theatrical.
Like a performance of the occult.
Exactly. Mackintosh describes a scene where a woman, clearly performing, enters a trance. She's acting out these visions so blatantly that even the author, Erden, calls it theatrical. She's telling the magnetizer that a little girl's heart is burning her shoulder.
It's like the 19th century version of a staged seance.
But the important thing, and this ties back to everything we've said about the algorithm, is that even if it was theater, the audience believed. The belief was the engine. Whether it was Atiya's branded cards or the theatrical magnetism of the salons, they were creating a new structured way for people to experience the unseen.
They were building the infrastructure for everything that came after. The pieces of the puzzle were being laid down.
Every piece. And next time we're going to see how those pieces started to form a much more cohesive and much more famous pattern. Okay, so we've been talking about the marketing side of things, the brands and the business models. But now we're moving into the actual, well, the user experience of 19th century mysticism.
And let me tell you, the reviews are mixed.
Extremely mixed. Mackintosh takes us into this report by a guy named Erden. He's visiting a group of spiritists in the 1850s. And it starts off like a standard seance, people holding hands around a table, a medium in a trance. But the code here is getting glitchy.
Glitchy? How so?
Well, the medium starts with a headache, and the leader, this white-faced man, literally blows on her head to make the pain vanish. And then, boom, the man starts shaking violently in his chair, eyes rolling back, screaming that the gates of heaven have opened.
Okay, that is classic. He's trying to trigger a spiritual event, but it feels so performative.
It is performative. Erden is literally mocking them. He says the leader starts calling out for famous spirits. Washington, Swedenborg, even Oberlin, and then, get this, the spirits actually respond.
Wait, they respond?
Yeah, but they're annoyed. The medium tells the group that the spirits are not very happy because they were called 7 hours late. They were ready to go, and they had to wait around.
Oh my God, even the ghosts have a schedule. Sorry, Mr. Swedenborg, the traffic was terrible on the astral plane.
It's hilarious, but it's also part of that spiritual algorithm we're talking about. They've created a system where spirits aren't just vague energies. They have personalities, moods, and grievances. They are part of the social hierarchy.
And it gets even weirder, right? It's becoming physical.
It gets violent. A young Russian guy in the group starts calling down spirits, and one of them literally attacks an elderly woman in the room. She screams that the spirit hit her in the shoulder.
See, this is where the line between spiritual breakthrough and uncontrolled chaos totally vanishes.
Exactly, and Erden is just sitting there trying not to burst out laughing. He eventually has to flee the room because he's laughing so hard, pretending he has a leg cramp just to escape the madness.
I mean, honestly, if I were there, I'd probably be looking for the exit too. But this leads us to the guy who actually tried to organize all this chaos, right? Allan Kardec.
Right. If the seance in that room was the glotchy software, Kardec was the programmer trying to write the documentation. He took this wild, mediumistic energy and turned it into a structured doctrine.
He's the one with the classes of spirits, right?
Yeah, he categorized them, bad, good, and pure. And he even mapped it onto the solar system. He claimed Mars was full of unpure spirits, the bad guys, while Jupiter was this magnificent, morally perfect world where beings glide over the surface like birds.
That is such a beautiful, intoxicating vision. It's like he was trying to turn the entire universe into a ladder of evolution.
But the spiritual algorithm had a darker, much more political side too. We can't talk about this era without talking about the saviors of Louis XVII.
Oh, here we go. The political cults.
Exactly. This is where the spiritual algorithm meets the political conspiracy. There was this massive movement claiming that the son of the executed Louis XVI hadn't actually died, but was living in exile.
And they weren't just making political claims. They were weaving in all this heavy, dark mythology.
They were using the legend of the Templars. They claimed the French Revolution was actually a way for the Templars to get revenge on the descendants of the man who killed their grandmaster. So
it's a claim to the throne and a cosmic vendetta.
Precisely. And it produced figures like Eugene Ventras. This guy wasn't just a politician, he was a mystic who claimed he received instructions from the Archangel Michael. He even had these miraculous communion hosts that supposedly bled real blood.
Okay, that is getting dark. The bleeding hosts part? That sounds like something straight out of a horror movie.
It was, and the algorithm here was so successful it actually got him arrested. The authorities were terrified that this kind of mystical fervor was going to destabilize the whole country.
It's fascinating. You have these people, the marketers, the linguists, the mediumists, all trying to find a way to make the invisible visible, and in doing so, they accidentally created a blueprint for modern belief systems.
They were building the foundations. Whether it was through a subscription model for the Kabbalah or a bleeding host in a small French village, they were all trying to program a way for humanity to interact with the divine.
And sometimes that code comes with some pretty terrifying bugs.
Okay, we have to talk about this. I know we were talking about the marketing of magic, but we've just stepped into something much more visceral.
It's getting dark. I can feel it.
It's dark and intense. McIntosh takes us to 1855, and he's describing a black mass that supposedly took place in a basement near Paris. And look, whether you believe the report or not, the imagery it's heavy.
The details are insane. He describes people in cataleptic sleep, like they're in a trance connected to wires that run through the walls into another room.
And that other room is this altar setup. There's a cross, but there's no Christ on it. There's a statue of a naked goddess. There's even a bowl of congealed blood and a hissing snake emerging from a pitcher.
That is literally the stuff of nightmares. It's so much more than just marketing or branding. This is ritualized chaos.
And it's tied back to that spiritual algorithm we've been discussing. The people running the operators, they aren't just praying. They're using these wires, these physical conduits, to try and conduct a spiritual essence. They're trying to engineer a way to summon a specific entity.
And they call him Amun-Ra?
Exactly. A spirit that claims to be the Amun-Ra of the Amentai. And he makes a demand. He tells a group that if they want him to work, they have to betray their Christian names by burning them on papyrus.
That's such a powerful, destructive image. Burning your very identity to make room for something else.
But then, and this is where it gets truly unsettling, the price for his presence is the virgin body of a sleeping young maiden.
Oh my God.
It's brutal. The master of ceremonies basically agrees. He says, "You'll get her, but you have to give us your active power." It's this horrific transactional relationship with the divine or the demonic.
And the ritual continues with this. This girl, who is brought in naked, still asleep, singing as she enters. It's so strange, it's both beautiful and deeply wrong.
And then the glitch happens again. Remember how we talked about the priest in the previous passage? The one who was terrified by the unseen presence? Well, it happens here too. A priest is part of the ceremony, and he starts acting paralyzed. He says he can feel the intense fire of a resisting power.
And it turns out, it's Ventras.
Yes. The man we just talked about, the one who was being exiled from France, was actually there in spirit, or at least via his emanations blocking the ceremony from London. He was the bug in their system. He was the countercode.
So even in the middle of a dark, blood-soaked ritual, the spiritual algorithm is being hacked by the very people it's trying to demonize.
It's incredible. But look at how the passage ends. The ritual collapses. The young man, the one who is also part of the ceremony, stands up and starts screaming at them. He calls them cowardly killers and unholy monsters. He basically exposes the hypocrisy of the whole thing.
He calls them hypocrites, who preach mercy by day but use the oils of prostitution by night. That is a heavy accusation.
It's a total destruction of the brand. He strips away the mystery and leaves only the ugliness. And it's so interesting because while this chaos is happening, the author is simultaneously introducing us to the man who will eventually organize all of this, Eliphas Levi.
So we go from a blood-soaked, chaotic basement ritual to the birth of a man who, was actually a very disciplined kid?
A very pious, very much normal kid. McIntosh takes us back to the beginning. 1810, Paris. Alphonse Louis Constantin Levi is born to a shoemaker and a very devout mother.
It's such a sharp pivot, from congealed blood to a shoemaker's son.
But look at the connection. He says his father taught him to pray, and his mother gave him discipline. He was a bright student in a Catholic school. He even said that the Catholic sacraments gave him a glimpse of the infinite.
So the software for his later occultism, it was actually programmed in the church?
That's exactly what I'm seeing. This is the crucial link. He wasn't an outsider attacking the church. He was an insider who took the language of the church, the idea of the infinite, the sacrament, the transubstantiation of bread into the body, and he recoded it for the occult.
He took the sacred and the secret and mashed them together.
And the most fascinating part, the man who shaped his early intellect, the Abbe Column, was a leading authority on, you guessed it, animal magnetism.
Of course, the very thing the church called heresy.
Exactly. So you'll have this 15-year-old boy sitting in a seminary, listening to a priest lecture on the forbidden arts of mesmer and magnetism. He's learning the official version, but he's being captivated by the heretical one.
So the spiritual algorithm wasn't just being written by Levi. He was being trained by the very people trying to suppress it. It's like he was studying the encryption keys while pretending to be part of the firewall.
That is a perfect way to put it, Emily. He was learning the structure of the old world so he could build the architecture of the new one.
God, that's such an intense way to frame it. I need a second to just breathe and let that sink in.
Same here. Let's take 5 and grab some water.
Okay, I'm back.
All right, let's settle in. I'm dialing in from the home studio today. A bit more quiet than the usual chaos, but I've got the good headphones on.
And I am leaning in. I've got my tea, and I am ready to get into the grit of this.
Good, because we are moving from the abstract golden age dreams into something much more visceral. We're looking at the formation of the man who would become Eliphas Levi.
Right, the architect. We've been talking about how he synthesized all these fragmented traditions, but now we're seeing the raw material, the trauma, the actual heavy 19th century reality.
Look at how the author starts this section. He quotes Levi describing a vision of a new Eden, where humanity feels the refreshing breath of love under the wings of a dove. It's almost saccharine.
Almost. But then boom, it pivots. He immediately brings up the reality of the church. He talks about the shameful removal of Abbot Colonna through dirty intrigues.
This is crucial. Remember what we said earlier about the instability of the old order? This is it. Levi is seeing the machinery of the church fail. He says he began to wonder if the priests even believed in God. He was horrified by what religion had become.
It's so heavy. He's watching the people he admires get pushed out by politics. It's a structural crisis as much as a spiritual one.
And then there's Saint Sulpice. Oh, man. The way the author describes the seminary, it sounds less like a place of worship and even more like a surveillance state.
A place where they slowly but surely learn ignorance. That is a brutal indictment. He describes the priests as having greasy hair, dirty hands, and thieving eyes.
It's a total 180 from the divine imagery. He's describing a culture of total mutual distrust. Students reporting on each other to the directors. The author says even friendship didn't exist there.
That's terrifying. Imagine being a young, passionate person, and your entire social world is designed to break your spirit through suspicion.
Wait, can you hear that?
Yeah, it's buzzing like a hornet. Is that your connection?
Hold on. Is that better?
Much better. My heart jumped. I thought a demon had entered the stream.
No demons, just a loose cable. Sorry about that. Anyway, despite this toxicity, Levi or Constant, as he was known then, decides to stay. He says his soul is crushed by grief, but he refused to leave the religion that had widowed and devastated him.
He's doubling down. It's that classic martyr complex. But then something shifts. He starts studying Hebrew.
Right. By 18, he's reading Hebrew originals. That's the software update for his brain. It's the beginning of that spiritual algorithm we're talking about. He's moving from Latin liturgy to the ancient hidden grammar.
But then, the human element hits. The author brings us to the classroom.
He's teaching catechism to young girls, feeling like an angel of God, and then a woman shows up with a daughter, Adele Allenbach.
And this is the moment the whole system crashes. He says he didn't love her like a man loves a woman. She was almost a child, But through her, he felt an irresistible need to love.
And he realizes his entire religious devotion was actually just a placeholder for a human need for affection. He says he couldn't accept his vows before an altar of a cold and selfish cult.
He literally walks away from the priesthood at the exact moment he was about to reach the highest rank. He chooses the human connection over the institutional structure.
It's a contradiction to his earlier claim about seeking the active and intelligent cause. He finds the cause in a person, not a dogma.
It's the death of the priest and the very birth of the magician. He had to lose the church to find the magic.
It's a heavy transition, isn't it? We go from the romanticized New Eden to this. The author describes his exit from the seminary not as a liberation, but as a direct collision with terrifying problems of secular life.
And it hits him immediately. His career change is a total collapse of his support system. He writes to a friend that he just wants to hide in a monastery to avoid a degrading and wretched existence as an apostate.
But the world doesn't let him hide. He loses his mother. The author is very specific here. It wasn't just a natural death, it was suicide. She had pinned all her hopes on him, and seeing him leave the church, it broke her.
That is so bleak. No wonder he says, "It seemed at that time that even faith and hope had left me." He's 26, penniless, and mourning a suicide.
And look at the physical description the author pulls from a contemporary portrait. He describes this young man with cold, impassive eyes and clenched lips. It's like the trauma is physically etched into his face.
But wait, there's a tiny glimmer of the old him. The author mentions a slight desire to even appear a dandy, with neat whiskers and a confident head position. He's trying to perform a version of himself that isn't broken.
Yeah, a bit of 19th century fake it till you make it, but the struggle to eat is real. He ends up teaching at a boarding school, and get this, the headmasters hated him just as much as the children loved him.
Honestly, that sounds like a classic middle management struggle. But then he finds a lifeline. This traveling actor, Aristide Bellul, pulls him into the world of the stage. He actually becomes an actor.
It's a fascinating pivot. The man trained for the altar is now performing for the masses, and that brings him to the most influential woman of his era, Flora Tristan.
Oh, Flora, the author brings in this incredible perspective from her grandson, the painter Gauguin. He calls her an amazing woman, a socialist and anarchist. She was a force of nature.
And she brings the modern into his life. Through her, he's introduced to radical politics. He moves from the rigid dogma of the seminary to the socialist worldview of women like Tristan.
But the chaos doesn't stop. Remember how we talked about the social instability of the time? Look at this character, Gano, the man who called himself Mappa.
This is wild. The author describes this encounter in a repulsive-looking little room. This man, Mappa, is wearing a tattered woman's cloak, surrounded by frenzied followers, acting like a prophet. He actually claims he's King Louis XVII returned to Earth, and that his partner is Marie Antoinette.
No way! He's literally hallucinating an entire royal resurrection.
And the most important part? Even though Constant, our future, Levi calls him a magnificent fool, he admits that Mappa's rhetoric conquered their fantasies. They were young, they were radical, and they wanted to seal the abyss of anarchy.
It's like a contagion of madness. This is exactly what we were saying about the era the boundaries between political rebellion and mystical mania were totally blurred.
Exactly, and this contagion leads him straight to a courtroom. He publishes the Bible of Liberty. It's deemed subversive, and suddenly, the architect is in a prison cell in Sainte-Pélagie.
So, the man who was trying to find his way back to the church ends up in a dungeon because of a political book.
But even in the darkness of the cell, there's a spark. He's reading. He picks up the works of Swedenborg. He says that while it seemed unintelligible and strange at first, once he dove into the system, he found infinite wisdom.
It's poetic, in a dark way. The prison walls couldn't stop the software update we talked about. The logic of the machine was already starting to take hold.
But the church isn't done with him. They force him to change his name to Abbé Baucourt just to avoid the scandal of his past. They try to scrub Constant from the record.
They tried to rename the soul to save the institution, but you can't hide a person like that. The scandal follows him, the newspapers expose him, and the cycle of persecution just continues.
It's a cycle of brokenness and reconstruction. He's losing his name, his family, and his status, but he's gaining the very ingredients that will eventually allow him to build a whole new universe of magic. All right, we're back. I've been staring at this next stretch of the text, and honestly, it's like watching a person try to build a house while the ground is literally liquefying under them.
It is. I mean, we just finished the dungeon phase, and now he's out, but he's even more scattered?
Exactly. He's officially out of the seminary, but the author shows this Bishop of Evere who actually liked him tried to help. He gave him a room. He offered him the priesthood again, a literal safety net.
And he said no, again.
Yeah, he says the priesthood was a heavy burden he wasn't ready to bear. But then, look at the irony here. He writes this deeply pious book, The Mother of God, and the very bishop who helped him bans it from his bookstore.
Oh, classic. I'll give you a room to sleep in, but don't you dare write anything I don't like.
Right? But even then, Constant doesn't hold a grudge. He calls the bishop a man of spirit and common sense. He's still trying to find a middle ground between the sacred and the profane.
But the profane is where things get really messy. I mean, look at the timeline. He's working with Flora Tristan the Revolutionary we talked about, and she leaves him this massive pile of notes to organize.
And then she just disappears. She goes to Lion, stops answering his letters, and then the news comes. She's dead.
That must have been a massive blow. To be left with her thoughts, her testament, and no person to guide you.
It pushed him deeper into the political trenches. He publishes her work, The Emancipation of Woman, and suddenly he's a voice for the marginalized. But the author pulls this incredible detail from his 1844 period. He's working as a tutor for this woman, Madame Legrand.
And this is where the breaking of the vows happens again, right?
It's almost theatrical. He says he didn't break his church vows, the church broke them for him. He claims they abandoned him when he had no support left. He's basically saying, I stayed loyal to the mission, but you failed the man.
It's such a defensive way to frame it. I didn't leave you. You pushed me out.
But then, oh man, the personal life. This is where it gets, well, it's a lot. He's living this life of extremes. One moment, he's writing pacifist manifestos. The next, he's throwing these massive, expensive champagne parties for journalists and radicals.
The spiritual algorithm is definitely getting some glitches here. He's broke, but he's hosting parties.
He is. He's literally spending money he doesn't have. And the guest list is a fever dream. You've got his old friends, you've got the radical pamphleteers, and then there she is again. Adele Allenbach, the girl who first woke up his heart.
She's there, seeing him as a father figure, while he's essentially spiraling through this lifestyle of excess.
And then there's the real scandal. The author moves us to 1845. He's staying with this woman, Eugenie, who is the deputy director of a school. They become lovers.
And she gets pregnant.
She does. She has a son. And the most heartbreaking part, the child never even meets his father.
This is just a trail of broken connections. It's like he's incapable of stability.
But wait, it gets even more chaotic. Because while he's with Eugenie, he becomes infatuated with her 17-year-old student, Noemi Cadio.
17?
He's basically under a spell. He moves her into his lodgings. And the drama is peak 19th century. Noemi's father threatens to have him arrested for corrupting a minor unless he marries her.
And let me guess, he agrees?
He marries her in July 1846, but they're penniless. The author says on their wedding day they had nothing to eat but a few potatoes they bought and fried at home.
That is so incredibly bleak. This man who is surrounded by all this high-level political and mystical theory is literally starving with his new wife.
It's an ascetic reality, even if it's not by choice. But even in this poverty, the words keep flowing. He's publishing like a madman religious tracts, political papers, even collections of songs. He's trying to write his way out of the chaos.
It's like he's trying to use language to create a structure that his actual life completely lacks.
Exactly. And then we hit 1848, the year of the Revolution. The streets of Paris are literally running with blood, 10,000 dead, according to the text. And he finds himself right back in the middle of it, using the same mass hysteria tactics we saw with Mappa.
He's looking for a pattern in the chaos. He sees the revolution not just as a particular political event, but as a spiritual one.
Precisely. Look at what he writes in the Testament of Liberty. He says we are entering the fourth stage of revolution. First comes images, then passions, then reflection, and finally, love. He claims that the entire purpose of all this political anarchy, all this social upheaval, is actually to clear the ground for the kingdom of the Holy Spirit to arrive on earth.
He's rebranding revolution as a divine ritual. He's saying the chaos of the streets is actually the clearing of the forest to make way for a new Eden.
That is the architect at work. He's taking the literal fire and blood of 1848 and coding it into a religious prophecy. He's turning a riot into a liturgy.
He's a cosmic spin doctor.
He really is. But the chapter ends on this strange, quiet note. He's living this life sometimes as a monk, sometimes as a radical, sometimes a husband, sometimes a father. But he's always searching, and the author hints that the real initiation is coming. A man named Hohen Vronsky is about to enter the frame.
The software update is finally arriving. The engineer is about to meet his instructor. I think we need to take a breather before our brains completely melt from all this 19th century drama.
Agreed, especially since the delivery driver just buzzed the door. The Vietnamese food is finally here.
Okay, we're back.
All right, we're back. I'm dialing in from home today, actually just finishing up some analysis on some old notes. It's quiet here, which is good, because we need to focus.
It's good to have you in your element, Seth. I'm in the studio, just feeling the energy of the room. But wow, we are picking up in such a heavy place. We left off with so much personal chaos for Constant.
Yeah, it's brutal. But look, we have to talk about the man who changed everything for him. Before we get to the magician part, we have to talk about Vronsky. The author describes him as this brilliant, starving shadow.
37 years of unremitting poverty? That is just, it's heartbreaking. He's teaching math to a banker who basically rips him off, loses a court case, and just persists.
But that's the thing. He's pouring out this massive stream of mathematical and philosophical writing while literally starving. And here's where it's wild. The author says his discoveries were so massive they could have eclipsed Newton.
Okay, that is a huge claim, but look at how Constant reacts to him. He wasn't just a fan, he was obsessed. He saw in Vronsky this way to finally bridge the gap between his warring identities.
Right. Remember what we said earlier about how the 19th century was such a mess of conflicting beliefs? Constant was a Christian, a socialist, a rationalist, and a mystic. He was pulling himself apart. But Vronsky offered him a miraculous synthesis.
It's like he found the source code. He saw that you could use math to explain religion and progress.
Exactly. And it wasn't just abstract theory. He had this thing, the prognometer.
Wait, what? A prediction machine?
It sounds like sci-fi, but it's deeply esoteric. The author describes it as being shaped like the Hebrew letter Shin. It has these copper spheres, pyramids representing divine and human knowledge. It's an entire encyclopedia in a mechanical device.
It sounds like he was trying to build a physical algorithm for the universe.
It's even crazier than that. Vronsky believed that if we could just express these higher laws mathematically, all the political suffering and chaos of the world would just stop. He thought a single leader, like Louis Napoleon, could use this science to fulfill a divine mission.
That sounds incredibly dangerous. It's like using a spiritual operating system to run a dictatorship.
It is. It's exactly that spiritual algorithm we've been talking about. But the tragedy is, while Vronsky was building these machines of logic, Constant's personal life was collapsing.
Yeah, the whole situation with Madame Constant and the Marquis de Montferrier, it's devastating. The betrayal, the disappearance, it's no wonder he had to reinvent himself.
He didn't just reinvent himself, he buried Abbé Constant entirely. He emerged as Eliphas Levi, the Jewish equivalent of his Christian names. It's a total identity wipe.
So he goes to London, trying to find a new community, and he actually finds one?
He does. He shows.
And then we get to the event, the evocation.
This is the moment. He's in a tower in London. He's wearing white robes, a crown of verbena leaves, holding a sword. He's performing a ritual to summon Apollonius of Tyana.
I can almost feel the tension, the smoke, the flickering flames. And then he sees it, a figure. But it's not the glorious Apollo he expected.
No, it's thin, dark, and grim. And the sheer physical reaction he has, his arm goes numb from the cold of the spirit. He's so terrified he can't even speak.
And the answer he gets? Death.
Just one word. The machine of his life was still running, but the output was pure, chilling mortality. Okay, we need to catch our enough breath. That London ritual, the sheer cold of that spirit. It's heavy. I'm still sitting here thinking about that one word, death.
It's chilling, Seth. Truly. But what's even more unsettling is how he follows it up. He's defensive, he says. I am not so serious and suffer from hallucinations that I would believe this.
Right. He's basically saying, look, I'm not crazy. I actually touched the divine or the terrifying, and it was real. He's doubling down on the legitimacy of the magic. He even says he doesn't care about explaining the physics of how he saw it. He just insists that he did.
It's like he's trying to prove the algorithm works, even if the output is a nightmare. But then the book shifts. We move away from the London Tower and back to Paris, 1854. And honestly, life looks humble.
A single, modest room. He's back on Boulevard Montparnasse, living in basically a studio apartment. He's illustrating for the Carmelites, trying to compete with Gustave Doré, which, let's be honest, is a tough gig, and trying to keep his literary career alive.
He's struggling, but his reputation is exploding. People are pilgrimaging to his door. And then this visitor shows up. An old white-haired priest dressed in black.
This is where the book gets really strange. The recommendation letter is hilarious. This guy, Desbarol, basically tells Levi, here's an old scholar who wants to mumble Hebrew spells with you. Take him, and please get rid of him as soon as you can.
I love that. That is such a work colleague vibe. Here's a person, please deal with them. But then the conversation turns intense.
It goes from mumbling spells to I know your secret name.
Wake how?
The priest, Charvoz, is a devout man, but Levi starts dropping names. He reveals he knows Charvoz was a vicar in Tours, that he follows a radical priest named Eugène Ventre, and then he drops the bombshell. He calls him Charvoz.
And the man just snaps. He turns pale. He jumps up, he says, I am Le Peraz, because that's his mother's name.
It's wild. This is that intellectual infrastructure we talked about earlier. Levi isn't just reading books. He's plugged into this underground web of people who know each's secret histories. And then Charvoz starts telling him about these miracles from Ventre's altar.
Okay, this is where I get skeptical. He describes this empty chalice, and suddenly a single drop of wine appears from a ceiling that has no holes. No cracks, just drip.
And it doesn't stop there. He talks about bleeding hosts, altar breads that are covered in blood, with actual heart shapes forming in the center. He asks to see these miraculous hosts, and the priest, trembling, opens a silver box. And there they are. 3 pieces of bread, soaked in blood. One even has a blood clot shaped like a heart.
It's terrifying. But look at what happens next. He shows Levi an album of other symbols on these breads. A pentagram, a Typhonian fork, even inverted Kabbalistic letters.
This is exactly what we were discussing with the Baphomet imagery earlier. The idea that these symbols, the things people call satanic, are actually appearing on sacred objects. It's like the lines between the holy and the profane are completely dissolving.
It's like the software of the universe is glitching. You have the most sacred items being marked with the symbols of the black magic, or the serpent.
And it ties right back to the political chaos. The book moves from this ritualistic horror to the assassination of Archbishop Seymour, a massive, public, bloody event in a crowded church.
In the description, it's so cinematic. The Archbishop standing in the light, and then a hand emerging from the shadows with a knife.
But here's the kicker. The climax of this whole chapter isn't the murder itself. It's what happens when Levi sees the face of the assassin in the papers.
He recognizes him.
He does. He realizes this young priest had come to his door a year earlier looking for a rare grimoire, saying he needed to realize a thought. He had essentially predicted his own crime to the man who would later read about it.
It's like the entire world, the politics, the religion, the magic. It's all just one giant, interconnected, and incredibly violent web. There's no escape from the pattern.
Okay, so we've survived the London Tower and the death prophecy. Now, the book brings us back to a more grounded period, 1854. He's living on Avenue du Maine. He's essentially a professional occultist now, trying to build a life.
But he's still got that edge, doesn't he? The author mentions he gives lectures, but he always warns his students, I don't perform spectacular magical feats.
Yeah, it's like a disclaimer. I can explain the universe to you, but don't expect me to levitate your sofa. But look how even his normal life is haunted. He tells this story about a worker named Maurice.
Oh, I saw this. This is the one where the guy is trying to use a prayer to ward off dark spirits.
Right, and the prayer is just a slip of paper. But one night, the paper literally spontaneously ignites in his hand. And then the next night, Maurice sees a bright light by his bed. And it's the silhouette of Levi himself reaching out for him.
That is so creepy. It's like he can't turn the magician part off. Even when he's just trying to help someone sleep, he's accidentally haunting them.
Exactly. He had to literally point the guy to the enough door. But this leads us into something much more physical. We move into the 1850s and 60s, and suddenly we're in the middle of alchemy experiments.
And this is where it gets, well, messy. I mean, look at this description of the pyrite experiment with Dr. Rosier.
Yeah, it's a disaster. They're looking at pyrite fools. Gold, and Levi thinks the way it looks like an apricot, or how it contains gold, might be the key. He's trying to find the first matter.
But it just turns into white powder and eats through his laundry. His supplies melted into a box where he kept his underwear. I mean, talk about a failed experiment.
It's a total mess. But even in that failure, there's a clue. He notices that because the pyrite oxidizes, it produces a gentle fire. And that reinforces his whole theory that the first matter must have the property of generating heat.
So even when his clothes are being destroyed by acid, he's like, aha, a coup for the great work. He is relentless.
He really is. He even claims to know the secret of transmutation, that he's seen metallic spermia, a white kind of mercury and a red kind of oil.
That sounds intensely biological.
It's definitely visceral. But look at the contrast in his life here. On one, you have these strange, chemical, almost grotesque experiments. On the other, he's part of this incredibly sophisticated, polished social circle in Paris. Salons, intellectuals, religious writers like Charles Fauvi.
It sounds like the golden age of his social life. He's a celebrity in these circles.
But even that is unstable. We see him joining the Freemasons in 1861, but then he leaves. He's too much of a wild card. He tells the church, I left the Masons because they were excommunicated and I need to keep my mind free. He's playing both sides of the religious fence.
He's a true independent agent. But wait, look at this transition. We go from the high society salons to a guy named Kenneth Mackenzie just showing up at his apartment.
This is such a great piece of writing by the author. He describes walking up to Levi's building on Avenue du Maine. It's a beautiful brick building, very professional. He sees these Hebrew symbols and the letters INRI on the door.
It's like the building itself is a ritual object.
Exactly. And then he meets the man himself. He describes Levi as this stunning, ruddy man with piercing eyes and a thick black beard. Not exactly the ethereal wizard you'd imagine, right?
More like a very intense professor.
And the funniest part? The reason he's wearing a hat. He tells Mackenzie he has to wear it because his hair is growing back after a tonsure. He's literally hiding a partially bald head.
That is so humanizing. It takes the great magician and turns him into a guy just trying to manage a bad haircut.
But then, and this is the moment the conversation shifts back to the work, Mackenzie asks about the tarot. And Levi doesn't just say yes, he pulls out this tiny, hand-drawn volume. He shows him 21 cards he drew himself, 20 years in the making, filled with symbols from the Godia and the Key of Solomon. He's the architect of the modern tarot.
20 years? That's the algorithm coming to life. He's been coding the system his entire adult life.
It's the moment where the man, the history, and the magic all collide. The magician wasn't just a persona. He was a craftsman, building a deck, one symbol at a time. My brain needs a break from all this heavy symbolism. Let's see if I can actually defeat you in Munchkin this time.
In your dreams. Get the cards ready.
All right, we're back. All right, we're back. I'm dialing in from the home office today. A bit quieter than the studio, but the energy is good.
It's nice, actually. It feels like we're peering into a private study.
Exactly, which is perfect because today's passage, well, it is a private study. We are literally walking through Eliphas Levi's room. The author, Mackintosh, is describing a visit to Levi's space, and man, it is dense.
Dense is an understatement. It sounds like a museum of everything occult. There's an altar with gilded vessels, a Jewish scroll of the law, a golden triangle with the name of Jehovah. It's like every esoteric trope ever conceived was shoved into one corner.
And it's right behind his desk, but look at how he describes the atmosphere. It's almost theatrical rather than just mystical. He mentions heavy yellow drapery and a painting of a woman, life-size, worshipping a divine light. And Levi tells the visitor that this woman is the Holy Kabbalah.
That is such a bold way to decorate a room. Oh, that's just my personification of the divine structure of the universe. But what I love is the contrast. He mentions this massive important desk, but then there's this little moment where they spot an Egyptian figure of Isis, and the visitor calls it exquisite.
And Levi just laughs. He says, in Paris, that's just a trade item. It's basically a large tobacco jar.
I love that. It grounds him. He's this massive figure of the spiritual algorithm, as we like to say. But he's also a guy living in the real, gritty, commercial world of 19th century Paris.
Right. He's not living in a vacuum. But then, he pivots to something much deeper. He starts talking about his books. He claims that if there's any truth in them, it's not his own wisdom, but rather inductions he's pulled from the 22 cards of the tarot.
It's like he's saying he's just the programmer, and the tarot is the code.
Precisely. He's the engineer. But, and this is where it gets wild, he follows this up with this incredibly vivid, almost scientific metaphor for the soul. He says, break a bottle of oil underwater at whatever depth. The oil will always rise to the surface while the shards of the bottle sink to the bottom. In the same way, the soul, upon leaving the body, rises to its destined spheres by its spiritual specific gravity.
Oh, wow. That is such a powerful image. It's so physical. It's like heaven is up because the physics of the soul requires it.
And the visitor even tries to argue with him. He says, but what about refraction? What about light reflecting back to Earth? And the author concludes that Levi is, at his core, an extreme materialist.
That's such a fascinating contradiction. He's a magician, but he approaches the spirit like a scientist approaching fluid dynamics. It fits that architect angle we're looking at. He's trying to find the math in the magic.
It's more than math, though. There's this heavy sense of destiny. He shows the visitor a photocopy of a prophecy from Paracelsus that predicts the French Revolution, the rise of Napoleon, and eventually, the final rise of the occult sciences as a way to restore harmony to society.
It's so heavy. You can feel the tension of the era. Everything is shifting. Everything is crumbling.
And speaking of shifting, there's this incredible story at the end of the passage. Levi describes a dream where the alchemist Paracelsus appears to him, hands him a copper medallion, and leads him through the streets of Paris to a specific spot.
And then he goes there in real life and finds the exact same coin at a market stall?
Exactly. He finds it, and yet, even then, he refuses to call it irrational. He says, look, I know coin dealers hang out by the docks. I've walked past this stall 1,000 times. I can't explain it, but I won't call it a miracle.
That's the line, isn't it? True magic requires ordinary intuition as well as faith. He won't let himself fall into the trap of being a believer in the cheap sense. He needs the evidence to be undeniable, even if he tries to rationalize it away.
He's protecting his system. If he admits it's a miracle, the algorithm breaks. It has to be a law.
A law of the universe, even if the law is just oil rising in the water.
Okay, we are moving from the physical room into something much more unstable. We're moving from the furniture into the phenomena.
Yeah, because the text just shifts from describing the desk to describing, well, floating hands.
It gets so weird. So the author brings us back to this guy, Mr. Hume. He's part of this whole medium mania craze in France. He claims he can enter trances that connect him directly to the spirit world, specifically to his dead mother.
Which sounds lovely if you're into that. But then it describes these cagnate mystics, people he's never even met, who appear in trances and can tell him secrets or names only he would know.
But look how Levi reacts to the actual seances. He's playing the skeptic detective. He mentions these visible and tactile hands that emerge from under the tables.
And he's so dismissive. He basically says, look, if these hands are coming out of the table, they're probably just hiding under some clever equipment, like something from Robert Houdini.
Exactly. He's looking for the stage trick. He notes these hands are warm, or glowing, or freezing cold. They play the piano, and get this, they play it so badly they ruin the tuning.
Imagine being a piano tuner and having a spectral hand just wreck your afternoon. But then it gets darker. He mentions Sir Bulwer Lytton, the famous novelist who actually tried to grab one of these hands to pull it away from its owner.
And the hand was stronger. It just slipped away. It's like the physics of these things is intentionally designed to defy human grip.
It reminds me of that search result I saw earlier about the Victorian obsession with seances. It wasn't just a hobby. It was like a TikTok phenomenon for people who liked ghosts. Everyone was obsessed with whether the visible hands were real or just clever illusions.
But then, we see the algorithm at work. This is my favorite part of the passage. Levi recounts a time he went to a seance incognito. He's watching this young medium who is writing frantically, clearly in a trance.
And the medium writes, "You have caused me pain."
Creepy, so Levi challenges him. He says, "Fine, tell me your name." The boy hesitates, then writes, "Revowell."
Wait, Revol? That's an anagram, isn't it?
Exactly. He reads it backward, Leo Ver. He connects it to a specific engraving of Alphos. He's using his programming skills to decode a glitch in the seance. The medium even calls him a fool and signs it Assel.
It's like he's debugging the spirit world. He's not saying the spirit isn't there. He's saying, I've identified the syntax of your message.
But the author makes a really important point here. He says that while miracle merchants like Hume were trying to even avoid the professor of high magic, the real seekers were following Levi's lead. Like this guy, Paul Christian.
Oh, I love the backstory on Paul Christian. He's like the dark mirror to Levi. He was a monk in training who backed out at the last minute, worked in a library, and basically stumbled into the occult by cleaning up forbidden manuscripts.
He's a researcher like no other. He actually used a system of onomantic astrology, using a person's name and birth year to predict the future. He turned names into math.
Which brings us back to our theme. If Levi is the architect, Christian is the one building the complex, beautiful, and slightly terrifying libraries of data. He's even claiming that the planets and zodiac signs are linked to the tarot keys. It's all one big, interconnected system of symbols.
It really is. And it all leads back to that image of the two men in Paris who could read the future like an open book. One was the eagle-like Christian, and the second was the solitary mage, Levi.
But then, the passage takes this sudden, sharp turn into something much more personal and much more unsettling.
Yeah, it ends with a visitor knocking on Levi's door. Not a spirit, but a man. A man who claims to know Levi's entire life, past, present, and future, just by the unrelenting law of numbers.
That sounds like a massive breach of privacy. It sounds like a hack.
It's a total system breach. The man predicts the exact years Levi's life changed. He even claims the man's very presence is tied to the spirit of Apollonius. It's intense. It's like someone finally found the source code to Levi's life and started reading it aloud. Okay, we're moving from the magic of his life into something much more heavy. We are entering Levi's final years now. The atmosphere in this part of the book changes as it goes from these strange, eerie encounters to a sense of real-world tragedy and physical decline.
It feels like watching a light go out, doesn't it? He starts having these massive, debilitating headaches that literally shut him down. But even when he can barely open his doors, people are still knocking. They aren't just looking for spells. They're bringing their actual lives to him.
Right. There's this one story I love because it shows how practical his algorithm was perceived to be. Two farmers show up, a father and son convinced they've been hit by black magic from their neighbors. Dead livestock, ruined crops, personal tragedies piling up. And Levi doesn't give them some long lecture on cosmic balance. He gives them an amulet with sacred symbols and a magnetized photograph of himself.
Wait, a photo of himself? Like, as a talisman? That is so incredibly meta. Even back then, he knew his own image carried weight within the system he built.
Exactly. And look at the follow-up. The son writes back saying the good force triumphed immediately after using it. Though, there's always a catch in these stories. The father tells them they were still suffering during full moons, so they actually write back asking for another talisman.
So much for the complete solution. It's like when you update your phone software, but all the bugs are still there, just rearranged into different folders.
Precisely. But things get really dark around here. We move into the Franco-Prussian War. This isn't just history. This is Levi watching his vision of France, the center of civilization, being physically dismantled by Prussian forces. He describes Paris as being shrouded in silence, broken only by the sound of cannons.
You can feel his heartbreak. In one passage, he says that looking at the soldiers makes his eyes fill with and tears because most won't return. It's such a visceral contrast to how we saw him earlier, this powerful architect of symbols, now sitting in a small shelter, surrounded by books, while the world burns outside.
And yet, even amidst the carnage, he has the strange fatalistic optimism. He claims anyone with actual wisdom could have seen this coming. To him, it wasn't chaos, it was destiny unfolding exactly as scripted.
Which ties perfectly back to what we said about the spiritual algorithm. If everything follows a law, then war and destruction aren't accidents either. They're just difficult variables in the equation.
Exactly. Though when you read his reaction during the siege of Paris, it sounds less like an equation and more like a fever dream. The author describes him looking almost possessed, eyes wild, claiming he can sense the arrival of the Comforter, or the Holy Spirit. He is literally waiting for a divine intervention to balance the scales.
But man, look at the end of his life here. Even his will is so specific, so controlled. He leaves manuscripts only to certain people, separates his scientific tools from his art objects, and mentions disagreements over why he couldn't leave certain things to his sister because of his brother-in-law.
It's such a human way to exit. Amidst all this talk of cosmic forces and spiritual gravity, there are family squabbles and legal stipulations. And then it ends with that priest arriving on May 31st to grant absolution, and Levi dies just hours later, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a clean break.
So what happens after? Does the system hold up without its architect? Because I was reading the evaluation section now, and some of these critiques are brutal, especially A.E. Waite.
Oh, Waite doesn't pull any punches. He basically calls Levi's writings an incoherent mess like, trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces constantly change shape and color. He describes him as having shifting moods rather than a stable doctrine.
Which sounds like every frustrating software update ever. But you can't deny his influence. Even if he was messy, look at who came through those doors. Kenneth Mackenzie, MacGregor Mathers. Even Aleister Crowley claimed he was the reincarnation of Levi.
That is wild. To claim you aren't just following someone, but literally rerunning their code. It shows how deeply embedded his persona became in the very DNA of Western occultism. But here's the real kicker from the author about why people struggle with him. The critique isn't that he wasn't powerful, it's that he couldn't decide if he was a rationalist or a mystic. You have this man claiming we should use science to understand magic, while also writing incredibly flowery, almost ridiculous prose about witches brewing love potions under the moonlight.
Yeah, one minute he's analyzing political reform and free education for all, and the next he's basically writing Gothic fan fiction. How were you supposed to find the truth in that? Is there any solid ground at all?
Well, the author suggests the ground is actually found in how Levi explains faith itself. He says something brilliant, and I want everyone to hear this. He claims that faith needs mystery as its object. And because humans can only grasp what they know, faith has to borrow images from our reality, even if those symbols feel absurdly out of place.
So the absurdity is the point. The glitch is where the meaning lives. That is such a heavy way to end a thought, though. My brain needs a second to process all that glitchy symbolism.
It's a lot. Let's take a quick breather and grab some water before we dive into the next layer. Alright, we're back. Alright, we are back. I'm dialing in from the home studio today. It's a bit quieter here than the main space, which is nice for digging into some of this heavier stuff.
It's good to have you here, Seth, even if it is just a digital connection. It feels focused.
That's the goal. We're looking at the architect today. I've been sitting with this passage from Macintosh, and honestly, it's wild how much of what we call modern magic is just a very clever piece of engineering by Eliphas Levi.
It's like he's coding the software for the whole 19th century occult revival, isn't it?
Exactly. He's a programmer as much as a mystic. Look at how he talks about faith versus science. the text says he views faith as a mathematical problem, where the x is just that variable that escapes our algebra.
I love that. It's so analytical. He's basically saying, look, science is great for the stuff we can measure, but there's a gap, and we need faith to bridge that gap.
Right, and this is the sneaky part, he doesn't want just any faith. He says we need a dogma protected by an authorized hierarchy. He's actually defending the idea of the priesthood. He says a priest, by virtue of being a priest, is a representative of God, and even if the man is a criminal, the office is sacred.
Wait, really? That sounds so traditional, almost anti-rebellion. I thought he was a radical.
That's the hidden layer Mackintosh is pointing out. He's playing a double game. He uses this ultra-orthodox language for the public to avoid being burned at the stake, essentially. But then, if you look at his private letters, he's much more, let's say, disrespectful to the institution.
How disrespectful?
He calls the rosary a toy acceptable for children. He says the church gives rosaries to people who are afraid to think. He literally calls the faithful a flock of invalids who just babble Papa, Mama to God.
Oh, wow. Okay, so he's definitely not the pious Catholic he pretends to be in his public manuals. He's much more subversive.
Much more. And this leads into the most famous bug, or feature, he introduced, the connection between the Kabbalah and the Tarot.
Now wait, we use that connection every single day, in every workshop, every reading. It's foundational.
But it's a complete invention. Mackintosh is so clear here, there is no historical basis for it. Before Levi, the Tarot and the Kabbalical Tree of Life were living in two different worlds. He's the one who mapped the 22 trumps to the Hebrew letters and the suits to the Tetragrammaton.
So the entire spiritual algorithm we're discussing, it's actually his personal patch? He just wrote it?
He synthesized it. He took existing fragments and created a unified system, and he did it using this concept of astral light.
Right, the universal agent, the medium through which everything flows.
Exactly. He describes it as a mirror of the imagination. He's saying that if you can use your will to manipulate this light through symbols like the pentagram, you can actually affect reality. But here's the real kicker, the actual purpose of all this. He says the goal of magic isn't to summon demons or show off. The whole point of all these elaborate rituals, the planets, the metals, the herbs, is just to teach you how to direct your own will.
To command yourself before you command others.
Precisely. He says, learn to will. This is the first secret of magical initiation. He's moving magic away from look at this miracle and toward look at this psychological mastery.
It's almost like he's turning the ritual into a training program for the subconscious.
Exactly. It's not about the ghost in the quantum room, it's about the person standing in the circle. He's using the astral light as the interface. But, as the book notes, he still warns against the heavy stuff. He's very careful about not letting the uninitiated see too much.
The classic magician's move, keep the source code hidden and only release the user interface to the masses.
Precisely. Okay, so we've established that Levi is the engineer, the guy writing the code. But now, the book takes us into his user manuals, specifically his warnings. He wasn't just teaching people how to use the system, he was terrified of them breaking it.
Right, like a developer warning you not to delete the root directory.
Exactly. He recounts this story of performing an invocation of Apollo in London and realizing, this is too much power for an untrained user. So, his solution was to pivot back to the safe mode, teaching students to use talismans and Kabbalistic rituals specifically to manipulate the forces within themselves.
To keep the energy contained, not out there in the ether, but internalized.
Yeah, but then, and this is where the algorithm gets really weird, he moves from psychology into straight-up prophecy. He gets obsessed with these massive cosmic timelines. He starts looking at Trithemius, the 16th century guy, and talks about these cycles of archangels ruling the world for like 354 years each.
354 years and 4 months? That is incredibly specific.
It's precise, and he uses these numbers to predict a world empire emerging around 1879. He says this empire would be a perfect blend of politics and religion, governed by the sun, holding the keys of the East. He even predicts it might have to undergo a sort of martyrdom to succeed.
So he's predicting a political shift and a spiritual metamorphosis.
He is. But then, and this is my favorite part, he basically hits update on his own theory. He moves away from this rigid archangel schedule and introduces the Mithratan Sarpanam cycle. He claims the world is led by a sequence of figures: Enoch, then Elijah, then Jesus.
Wait, so he's saying the software of history is just a series of major patches?
Precisamente, and he gets even more wild. He claims that talking tables and rebellious spirits are signaling the return of Enoch. He actually predicts that Enoch will reappear in the year 2000 to lead a school of over 7,000 adepts.
7,000 adepts? That is a massive user base. It sounds like he's describing a global hidden network.
And he links it to the decline of the papacy. He's basically saying the old guard is losing its grip on science and the Kabbalah, making way for this new hidden infrastructure. It's all very conspiratorial, yet strangely structural.
It's interesting how much of this relies on the idea of forces moving through time. But Seth, we have to talk about the successor mentioned here. Because if Levi is the architect, this next guy, Papus, he seems like the one who actually took the technology into the field.
Oh, absolutely. This is where the spiritual algorithm meets real-world application and high-stakes drama. The book introduces Papus, the pseudonym for Incasis, and his origin story is, well, it's a total vibe. He was a medical student.
I love that. A doctor who realizes that mineral salts and plant cells are just part of a much larger, much more sacrificial evolutionary process. He says the law of struggle is fine, but it misses the law of sacrifice.
That's such a powerful reframe. He's looking at biology and saying, where is the spirit and the chemistry? He starts studying alchemy in Hebrew, and suddenly he's a mystic. He sees the green lion of acid and the warrior of iron as symbols of a deeper unified science.
It's so much more romantic than just biology. It's much more like the energy I feel when I'm in a deep yoga practice. There's a hidden flow.
But then, the book moves from the theory to this incredible, almost cinematic legend about Papus in Russia. This is the part that gets everyone. The story goes, Papus is called to the imperial palace in St. Petersburg during a massive crisis. He performs this intense ritual of necromancy, specifically an evocation of the late Tsar Alexander III to ask if the monarchy should fight the rising revolution.
No way. He actually summoned a dead Tsar?
The text says he did. And the phantom of the Tsar tells the current Tsar, Nicholas II, you must crush the revolution at all costs, but it will revive. Do not stop fighting.
That is incredibly heavy and terrifying.
It's dark, but the absolute kicker, is that Papus claims his magic could stop the disaster, but only as long as he remains on the material plane. And then he dies, shortly after the revolution happens.
So the magical protection vanished with the man.
Exactly. Whether you believe the story or not, and the author notes that Papus's own journal later called the whole thing a fiction, the impact of the legend is what matters. It turned Papus into a legend. It made magic feel like something that could actually tip the scales of empires.
It's like the myth became the reality.
Just like Levi intended. He gave them the tools, and the successors, they started using them to try and rewrite history itself. Okay, so we've just finished this heavy, almost tragic look at Papus, a man who could supposedly bridge the gap between the living and the dead, only to be swept away by the very historical tides he tried to predict.
It's so bittersweet. He leaves behind all this medicine, all this magic, but the software he was running, it couldn't save the real world from the revolution.
No, it couldn't. But the lineage of the code didn't die with him. It just moved into some even stranger hands. McIntosh starts introducing these characters that feel like they stepped straight out of a fever dream, like Santiv Dolvedra.
Oh, I remember you mentioning him, the Marquis, right?
Exactly. This guy was a walking contradiction. He'd be sitting in a house full of these massive, imposing ancestral portraits, all wigs, and heraldry, looking like a relic of the old aristocracy. But then, he'd casually mention, oh, by the way, I just had a telepathic session with the Great Lama of Tibet.
No way. That is so 19th century. The spiritual influencer vibes are strong with this one.
It's wild, and the book mentions these whispers among his friends that he might have actually succeeded in making gold.
Okay, now we're getting into the real alchemy. Did he?
The author plays it smart here. He quotes Jules Boyce, who visited the Marquis, and asked him directly, "Is it true?" And the Marquis just stared at him and basically said, "Hey, you want to be my apprentice and see my lab?" And Boyce, being a gentleman, declined. He says he'd never learned to make gold because he wasn't impolite enough to follow the alchemical formula for politeness.
I love that. I didn't fail at alchemy. I was just too well-mannered to succeed.
Precisely. But then the text takes a turn. It moves from this flamboyant, almost theatrical mysticism into something much more unsettling. St. Yves had this obsession with his dead wife. He turned a room in his house into a private chapel just to be near her spirit. He even got permission from the Pope to hold masses there.
That's heavy. It's one thing to study the astral light as a theory, but to live in a house where the boundary between life and death is just a door you walk through every day, that's a lot of spiritual pressure.
It is, and it sets the stage for the next big group in the book, the Kabbalistic Order of the Rose and Cross. And the people running it, they make St. Yves look normal.
How is that possible?
Well, you have Stanislas de Guaita. He was this brilliant, somewhat lazy student of the classics, obsessed with Baudelaire and chemistry. But then he meets Papus's friend, Seth and Peladan. And Peladan, Seth, he is a character.
I've heard the descriptions. He's the guy who shows up at Montmartre cafes in full medieval costume, right?
Yes, huge black beard, wild hair, wearing monk's robes or velvet breeches with lace. He called himself Sar Merodach Peladan. He literally used an Assyrian title for king. He was writing these novels that blended occultism with intense eroticism. He even claimed to have read all the sensual literature from Voltaire to de Sade.
Okay, so he's basically the patron saint of the Bohemian occult underground.
Exactly. And he was obsessed with this idea of the androgyne, the perfect union of male and female, intellect and desire. It's a direct callback to the idea of balance we saw with Levi's Batman. He was taking Levi's algorithm and injecting it with a lot more, well, passion.
And probably a lot more drama. But then, as they grow as equals, the masks slip.
They totally do. De Guaita starts calling him out. He criticizes Peladan's intense hatred of Germany, which was personal, because of a massive medical tragedy in the family, and he even calls him out on his sensual adventures. He literally writes to him, "Your soul is constantly visited and possessed by ridiculous sentimental cravings. Can't you live even 1 week without being obsessed with these vanities?"
Hote, that is a brutal unfollow in letter form.
It's brutal, and the whole relationship becomes this weird, coded playground. They start writing to each other using pseudonyms like Nebo and Merodach, using astrological symbols, and even symbols of sexual union like the lingam and yoni.
So the spiritual algorithm wasn't just about magic and stars. It was also about testing the limits of their own personal boundaries.
It was a total experiment in living the myth. They weren't just reading the books, they were trying to embody the symbols. But even amidst all this theatricality, there's this underlying sense of a trap, a warning.
Like the end of the passage, the trap mentioned in the last line?
A trap. The Tarot will tell you if you attend to the prayer. The book leaves us right on that edge. The era of the great architects is closing, and the players are left wandering through a labyrinth of their own making. That edge is exactly where we need to pause. My brain needs a moment to process that labyrinth.
Same here, let's take 5 and reset.
Okay, let's dive back in. All right, we are back. I'm dialing in from the home studio today. A bit of a change of pace, but the energy is high. Emily, you ready to jump back into the late 19th century?
Oh, absolutely. I've been waiting to get back to this drama. It's getting so messy.
Messy is an understatement. We left off with the tension between de Guaita and Peladan, but the author Mackintosh is showing us that it's more than a personal spat. It's like watching the birth of a new programmable way of looking at the soul.
Right, like he's the architect. But look, before the fighting starts, there's this incredible, almost cinematic moment with Oswald Worth. Seth, did you read that part about the hypnotic healer?
I did. It's wild. Worth is practicing magnetic healing, Remember how we talked about Mesmer earlier? And he's working on this woman who falls into a trance. She tells him, I see a letter sealed with red wax, you will receive it. And then, weeks later, boom, a letter arrives, exactly as described.
That is so much more than just a coincidence. It's like the universe was actively coding the meeting into existence.
Exactly, and it's more than a spooky story. This meeting is what links Worth back to the whole system. He becomes DeGueta's secretary, and more importantly, he starts applying the algorithm to the tarot. He publishes the 22 Kabbalistic keys of the tarot.
Which, wait, isn't that where the modern connection between the tarot and the Kabbalah actually gets codified?
Precisely. It's not ancient, it's a deliberate 19th century construction. It's like they were writing the software for modern magic as they went.
But then the software starts to glitch. Or rather, the developers start fighting.
Yeah, we see the split. Peladan, who, by the way, is performing this incredibly dramatic role, breaks away. He doesn't just leave, he creates his own thing, the Order of the Catholic Rose, Cross, Temple, and Grail.
That name is a mouthful. It sounds like he's trying to collect every mystical symbol in Paris.
He really is, and he's doing it with this intense, almost theatrical flair. He's wearing monastic robes, covered in rings, using this melodious voice. He even announces that he's found lost plays by Aeschylus. He's basically trying to stage a revival of the entire classical world through an occult lens.
But here's the kicker. He's trying to force magic back into the arms of the Catholic Church. He's basically saying, I want the mystery, but I want it under the Pope's umbrella.
It's such a bizarre contradiction. On one hand, he's an occultist, but on the other, he's preaching the coming kingdom of the Comforter. He even has this intense interview process for candidates. 10 questions. Who are you? What is your need? What is your happiness?
That sounds less like an interview and an actual psychological stripping of the ego.
It really does. But DeGueta, he is not having it. He writes these letters that start off almost polite and showing how much he enjoys reading Peladan's work, but then they turn incredibly sharp. He calls Peladan's actions acts of intentional madness.
And then the final blow, the 1893 proclamation. They literally label him a schismatic and an apostate. They're taking him to the tribunal of public opinion.
It's a total breakdown of the unified brotherhood DeGueta wanted. Instead of one big, organized system, you end up with these competing, warring factions, each claiming the same titles and the same symbols.
It's like the spiritual algorithm was being hacked by everyone at once.
That is a perfect way to put it. The architecture was there, but everyone was trying to rewrite the code to suit their own vision of the divine. Okay, let's ground ourselves. We've been talking about these high-stakes power struggles, but I want to pull our eyes toward a specific corner of Paris. A bookstore. Edmond Bailly's shop on Rue de la Chaussée d'Antin.
Oh, I can almost smell it. Old paper, incense, maybe a hint of clove.
Exactly, and this wasn't just a shop, it was the central server for the whole Parisian occult network. Everyone hung out there. DeGueta, Papus, even the novelist J.K. Huysmans.
Wait, Huysmans? The guy who wrote Against the Grain? I remember you mentioning him. He's the one who turned realism on its head, right?
That's him, and the author describes him as this neatly dressed, short-haired man with a very prominent beard. A minor clerk by day, but a sensation in literature by night. He lived on the same street where Eliphas Levi died. It's like the entire era was physically overlapping.
I love that image. But the way he describes the character in Huysmans' book, De Sentience, it's so intense. He's this man who's so bored with reality that he creates this hypersensory cocoon. He has a piano that plays liqueurs.
Yeah, a keyboard where the notes are different flavored spirits. It sounds like a fever dream. But look at the point the author is making. Des Essentials is searching for stimulation. He's trying to find something that can pierce through the boredom of the mundane.
And that's the bridge to the occult, isn't it? It's more than being spooky. It's a desperate search for something real.
Precisely. Huysmans himself once said, and this is a great quote, that he wasn't interested in cheap spiritualism. He didn't care for the mediums with their parlor tricks or the old ladies with their tea table antiques. He wanted the true occultism, something below or around reality.
A mystery that haunts me. That's such a heavy way to live.
It is, and it led him straight into the arms of people like Berthe Courier. The author describes her as this soul with whom mystery spoke. She was an expert in Asian religions, deeply involved in the dark arts. She's the one who really pulled him into the deep end.
Then, Seth, the tone shifts. We go from these atmospheric bookstores and sensory experiments to scandal, to people investigating dark magic and actual literal blood.
Yeah, we move from the aesthetic to the visceral. Heisman starts looking into Gilles de Rais, the infamous French marshal who turned into a serial killer. He even visits the ruins of his castle.
And the book mentions this controversy about whether Heisman's actually witnessed a black mass.
Right? Some say he was just reading about it in anti-Satanist polemics. But others claim he was there. They say he saw it, and it was terrifying and devilish.
That's a lot to carry. But it's not even the darkest part of this chapter. We have to talk about Abbé Boulogne.
God, what a wreck of a human being.
He's described as this extraordinary figure who was actually a total scandal. He was a priest, a doctor of theology, but he was caught up in these unorthodox practices.
Let's look at the claims here, because they are wild. He and a nun, Sister Adele, started this community called the Society for the Reparation of Souls. But the rumors, they weren't just about bad theology. There were claims of using deceptive medicines, and this is the part that's hard to read: rumors of a sexual affair and even the sacrifice of a child.
I mean, the author says he doesn't personally believe the child sacrifice part, but the reputation was there. It's so heavy.
And it's not random madness. This man was trying to engineer a new kind of religion. He claimed to be the reincarnation of John the Baptist. He even had a pentagram tattooed on the corner of his left eye, like a symbol of the Paraclete.
Wait, a pentagram on his eye? Like a permanent ritualistic mark?
Exactly. He was trying to use his own body as a canvas for this new spiritualized identity. He even taught these unions of life, these rituals where you'd seek connection with celestial or even lower entities through acts of love to achieve redemption.
It sounds like he was trying to turn even the most human, primal impulses into a religious sacrament.
And that is exactly what triggered the tribunal. Look at how the author describes the crackdown. De Gueda and Wyvert didn't just disagree with him, they went on a mission to expose him. They gathered evidence letters, reports from witnesses, and they basically issued a verdict.
They called his doctrines the manure of his depraved imagination.
Ouch! That is a brutal way to end a professional relationship. They weren't just saying he was wrong, they were saying he was polluting the very idea of the Kabbalah.
It's so strange. We started this episode talking about an architect building a system, but by the end of this section, the architects they're more like prosecutors. They're trying to purge the system of anyone who makes it too messy.
And that's the tension. You can't build a structured, programmable magic without the risk of someone trying to use that same code to manifest something. Well, something much darker. We're back. And I have to say, the atmosphere in this chapter, it's getting heavy. The drama of the split is still there, but now the air itself is thickening with all this. Ritual smoke and scandal.
It really is. I feel like I need to wash my hands just reading about this part. We left off with the tribunal judging Abbé Boulogne, but look at what happens next. The tension doesn't go away. It just turns into a full-blown magical war.
Yeah, look at this line right here. The author says Boulogne took Orr's letter as a declaration of war. He wasn't just offended. He was convinced that de Gueda and his crew were going to try to execute him via magic.
Magic is a weapon of assassination. That's terrifying.
And he wasn't just sitting there. He was developing countermeasures. He believed his enemies would use spells they'd learned from him to attack him. It's like a feedback loop of curses.
It's so paranoid. But it worked, didn't it? De Gueda couldn't get rid of him, so he tried to expose him instead. He publishes The Temple of Satan in 1891 just to drag these Lyon sects into the light.
Right, and that's where the novelist Heismans enters the fray. And this is where it gets so much more personal. Heismans wasn't just observing. He was actively seeking out the source code. He was writing to Boulogne, looking for first-hand information on the occult.
But he didn't just go to anyone. He had this really intense, almost desperate energy in his letters. Look at how he writes to Boulogne. He basically says, "I've heard your name spoken with horror, and that actually makes me like you more."
I mean, talk about a backhanded compliment.
Exactly, and then he goes even further. He offers him exceptional publicity. He says, "I could present you as a Superman, a Satanist, a one-of-a-kind figure." He's literally offering to brand him as a legend if he can just get the facts.
It's such a strange, predatory kind of curiosity. He doesn't even want an initiation. He just wants reliable documents and results from experiments. He wants the data. He wants to prove that the scary stuff is real.
And that leads us back to that spiritual naturalism idea we talked about earlier. He's tired of the idiotic theories and the dull wordiness of other occultists. He wants to find something that can prove the devil actually exists and is still the absolute master of the world.
It's a heavy claim. But then, look at the response from Buelin or Dr. Johannes as he signs it. He doesn't take the bait. He refuses the publicity. He says he's not a Satanist, but an adept who has declared war on all demonic cults.
He's playing hard to get. He won't give anything up until he knows Heisman's true intentions.
And he sends a spy. He sends this woman, Julie Thibault, to Paris to vet Heisman's. And the way the author describes her, she's this small, middle-aged woman in a cheap black dress, clutching a prayer book and an umbrella. But she's a traveler. She's walked 25,000 miles across Europe.
I love her. She sounds like a force of nature, and she ends up becoming Heisman's companion and housekeeper. Talk about an unexpected way to find a career.
But the real payload comes when she brings him the documents. The actual descriptions of spells, the Black Mass, the Sacrum of Glory. This software is finally being downloaded into Heisman's brain.
But wait, the most incredible part isn't just the documents. It's that the Black Mass actually happens in the book. Heisman writes about this ceremony in a private chapel, and it is pure nightmare fuel.
It's visceral. There's this priest, Doctree, wearing a bright red hat with bison horns, and a robe the color of dried blood.
And the altar. He describes a crucifix with a grotesque Christ with a wicked smile stretched across his face.
And the priest doesn't pray to Christ. He stands there and shouts, "Master of scandals, prince of luxurious sins, Satan, it is you whom we worship." He's literally insulting the cross right in front of the altar.
It sounds so overwhelming. The smoke from the herbs, the chanting, the hysteria of the crowd. It's no wonder the character, Durdle, has to flee the room in a state of near fainting.
It brings us full circle, doesn't it? We started with architects and engineers trying to build a system, but the closer you get to the actual practice, the more it dissolves into this sensory, terrifying chaos. The algorithm breaks down into blood, smoke, and madness.
That imagery is getting much too intense for a Tuesday afternoon. Let's take a quick breather and clear the air.
Agreed. I need a moment to recalibrate my equilibrium after that description. Okay, we're back. Okay, we're back. And I'll be enough honest, Emily, I'm still a little unsettled. That last bit about the mirror falling? I've seen some strange things in my years of study, but that specific type of targeted physical manifestation, it gets under the skin.
Oh, tell me about it. I can't stop thinking about that exorcist ointment. The way the author describes it, the coal, the hissing, that heavy smell of incense and camphor, it felt so visceral, like I was standing in that room with Jules Hiret. It's one thing to read about magic, but when the text describes the smell of a ritual, it makes the whole thing feel way too possible.
Right. And that's the genius and the danger of how McIntosh presents this. He's showing us that for people like Heisman's, this wasn't just literary flair. It was a literal daily struggle. He calls them liquid fistfights.
Liquid fistfights. That is such a classic Heisman's way to describe an astral attack. He's so cynical, even when he's terrified. But wait, look at what he says about the antidotes from Abbe Buelin. He wasn't just reading about magic, he was actively using these magical counters to protect himself.
Exactly. And it ties back to what we discussed earlier about the spiritual algorithm. This wasn't just superstition to them. It was a system. You have an attack, you burn the ointment, you draw the circle, you wave the miraculous cloth. It's programmable. It's a protocol.
But then, Seth, look at the cost. The cost of being part of this algorithm. The whole section about the death of Abbe Buell is just, it's heavy. The way Madame Thibault describes him, the sudden choking, the struggle, the saving water, It's so much more intimate and much more frightening than a simple heart attack.
It's haunting. And what's even more fascinating, and maybe a bit dark, is how the community reacted. The press didn't just report a death. They started accusing the leaders, like Gita, of actual murder. They were saying the Rosicrucians killed him with magic.
And de Goethe's response. I mean, if you're going to defend yourself in a newspaper, you might as well go full drama. He's like, oh, you think I use invisible poisons? You think I have a familiar in my closet? Is that all? He's leaning into the chaos.
He's trying to reclaim the narrative by making the accusations look ridiculous, but he can't escape the gravity of it. It's that tension we talked about, the litmus test of the occult. Is it just a subject you study, or is it a lens through which you see the entire world?
And that is exactly what the author says about the writers. He splits them into two groups. The first group, like Balzac, just studies it. But the second group, that use it as a glass, they don't just look at the occult. They look through it to see reality itself.
Which brings us to the heavy hitters, like Balzac's Seraphita. Now, that's where the algorithm gets really strange. We ain't moving from the gritty, smoky rooms of Paris to this ethereal, almost biological mystery. A character who is both male and female, a being that exists to bridge worlds.
It's beautiful, but so unsettling. The idea that silence and meditation are the keys, but the path is difficult. It feels like a callback to everything we've been saying about the struggle to connect with that active cause without losing your mind.
Precisely. We've gone from the liquid fistfights of the streets to the celestial spheres of the soul. It's all part of the same architecture. It's a heavy pivot, isn't it? We went from the liquid fistfights of street-level magic to the literal stars, or at least the idea of reaching them.
It feels so much more elevated. But I love how the author doesn't let us forget the human element. He looks at Balzac's Seraphita, this being that's almost too pure for this world, and he's basically saying, look, the author didn't think this was a hallucination. He's presenting these visions as a subjective reality. They aren't just dreams, they are a different kind of truth.
Right, and he's careful here. He doesn't say Balzac was a Swedenborgian in the sense of being a convert to a new religion. He says it's more likely that Balzac simply recognized that there are multiple paths to the spirit world. One path might be Swedenborg's, but it's not the only one. It's like saying there are different programming languages, but they're all trying to interface with the same underlying OS.
Spoken like a true computer scientist. But then we move to the poets. And this is where it gets really wild. We have Esquiros, who is literally walking in the footsteps of Mesmer, trying to probe the deep sea of sleep.
And then, of course, there's Victor Hugo. Now, Hugo is the heavyweight. He's not just reading about the occult, he's participating. The author points out that while his interest might have started as intellectual, the death of his daughter in 1843 changed everything. It turned a curiosity into a desperate need to communicate with the dead.
And he actually did it. He was conducting seances in Jersey with his family. His son Charles was even acting as the medium. Can you imagine? Sitting around a table, the waves crashing outside in St. Lyre, and suddenly, Shakespeare starts talking to you.
Wait, let's look at that specific interaction. This part is incredible. Hugo asks Shakespeare if he's still working on the astral plane. He's asking if the creative process continues after death, and Shakespeare's response is so profoundly humble. He says, to create is work, to contemplate is the reward. He says heaven would be imperfect if he could create his own masterpieces, because that would be usurping God.
That is so beautiful. But then, it gets so strange. Shakespeare tells Hugo that English is much lower than French. I mean, talk about an ego. Even as a ghost, he's a bit of a snob.
Haha, exactly. But look at the poetry he recites. He's shouting, Hamlet, Lear, kneel, Romeo, kneel. He's commanding his own characters to bow before God. It's this incredible dramatic astral performance. And the author notes that after this, Shakespeare only spoke in verse.
But Seth, we have to talk about the but that haunts the whole section. Hugo, he stopped. He actually admitted he got scared.
Yeah. He reached a point where the experiments became too much. He saw where they might lead and he pulled back. And honestly, looking at what the author says about other writers like the story of the girl in the glass ball, who starts to vanish into a world of metallic butterflies and strange architecture, I can see why. The algorithm doesn't just show you the light, it can pull you into the dark.
That's the terrifying part of the spiritual algorithm. We talk about the poets using the occult as a lens, but for some, the lens becomes a doorway that you can enough close. You start looking for the truth, and suddenly you're being consumed by the ritual.
And that brings us to the final, most intense example, Arthur Rimbaud. If Hugo was a cautious explorer, Rimbaud was a demolition expert. He didn't just want to study the occult, he wanted self-annihilation. He wanted to become an illuminae by destroying his own ego to reach the absolute.
And he used alchemy to do it. His Sonnet of the Vowels. It's literally a chemical reaction in poem form. Black for A, white for E, red for I. It follows the entire alchemical process of dissolution and purification.
It's brilliant. He's using the power of words to mimic the physical transmutation of metals. He's trying to forge a new language where the word and the object are the same thing. It's the goal of the magician to bridge the gap between the symbol and the reality.
It makes you wonder if we're all living in a world shaped by these linguistic and spiritual codes. Are we just reading the code? Or are we part of the script?
All right, so we've traveled through the high poetry of Rimbaud and the heavy cosmic grief of Hugo. But now, the author is pulling us into a very different kind of darkness. He's moving away from the sublime and into something much more, much more scandalous.
Scandalous is an understatement. We're entering the era of the satanic panic of the 19th century. The book is pivoting to this massive wave of public anxiety. People were genuinely terrified that a great devilish conspiracy was operating right under their noses.
And it's fascinating because, as we saw with the poets, the occult was becoming a glass through which to see the world. But for the general public, that glass was reflecting something much more monstrous. Look at what he says about Jules Michelet.
Oh, I love this part, because Michelet actually tries to reclaim the narrative. He's looking back at medieval witchcraft, but he's not saying it was this evil supernatural thing. He's saying it was a form of social protest.
Right, he frames it as a rebellion against the crushing weight of religious dogma. He even suggests that the Black Mass could be interpreted as the liberation of Eve, this idea of instinct triumphing over rigid, suffocating morality.
It's such a radical way to reframe it. It turns the villain into a revolutionary. But then, of course, the author shows us the other side of the coin, the side that's much more heavy on the sensationalism.
Exactly. We move from Michelet's social theory to guys like Jules Bois, who basically says, look, there isn't just one Satan. There are three. He categorizes them: the Satan of the downtrodden, the Satan of the decadent rich, and then my personal favorite, the Satan of the dilettantes.
The Satan of the bored intellectuals. That is so cutting. He's basically saying that even just being curious about mysticism is a form of deviation.
He's broadening the definition of Satanism so much that it almost includes everything: Zoroastrianism, Kabbalah, even ceremonial magic. It's an impossible standard, but this leads us to the real glitch in the system, the most insane part of this whole historical era.
You mean the Leo Taxil hoax?
I mean the Leo Taxil hoax.
Oh man, this is where the spiritual algorithm gets a virus. The author introduces us to Gabriel Joachim Paget, is better known as Leo Taxil. And Seth, this guy wasn't just a prankster. He was an architect of chaos.
He was a master class in manipulation. He starts out as an anti-clerical revolutionary running these high circulation journals, literally fighting the church. And then get this, he does a complete volte-face. He suddenly converts to Catholicism, gets an audience with the Pope, and presents himself as this big-shot informant.
In the bait he used, it was even more wild than the actual conspiracy. He created a woman. He invented Diana Vaughan.
He didn't just invent a person, he invented an entire lineage. He claimed she was the descendant of an alchemist who had a child with the goddess Venus Astarte. He built this entire sprawling genealogical web of demonic lineages and high-ranking priestesses to trick the Catholic hierarchy.
It's so much work. I mean, the level of detail he describes: her devotion to the Palladium, her conflict with other priestesses, even this ridiculous prophecy about a daughter being born in Jerusalem from a demon named Betru. And the craziest part, the church fell for it. They were so desperate to find a way to use her that they didn't check if she actually existed.
It's a deep fake of the 1890s. And look at the sheer absurdity of the rituals he was reporting on. He describes a Palladium Mass where the priest is an old Jew with a devil's tail attached, and they're performing ceremonies in front of an altar to Baphomet.
It's pure theater. He's using the language of the occult to create a grotesque parody of the very thing he's trying to expose. It's almost like he's using the spiritual algorithm to hack the public sphere.
Precisely. He took all those real tensions, the fear of Freemasonry, the anxiety over changing social orders, the suspicion of new religions, and he amplified them through a lens of pure, manufactured horror.
It makes you wonder if even the exposures of the time were just carefully constructed illusions, how much of what we think we know about history is just a very well-executed prank.
That is a terrifying thought to end on. We've gone from the sincere search for the divine to the calculated manufacturing of the demonic.
It's a lot to process. We'll be right back after the break to see if we can find any truth left in the wreckage.
That's a heavy thought to sit with for a moment. And honestly, I think we all need a breather from these conspiracies.
Speaking of breath, the Moroccan food is here. Okay, we're back.
All right, we're back. I'm dialing in from the study today, just surrounded by a few more stacks of old journals than usual.
A scholarly fortress. I love it. It feels appropriate, especially considering the sheer intensity of the text we're walking through today.
It's a heavy one. We've been tracing the spiritual algorithm, this idea of how 19th century figures like Levi were essentially coding a new way to perceive reality. But today the code gets messy. It gets visceral.
Yeah, we're looking at what the author calls a parody of communion. It's this ritual description. It's dark, Seth. There's a Jewish servant and a performing mage, and they're talking about, fresh-cut hearts.
Right, it's incredibly graphic. The text describes a priest placing a dish of hearts on the ground, and then the mage says, "As the scythe cuts hearts, so do we cut the heads of the servants of Adonai."
It's so violent. And then it gets even more bizarre. They're calling on good demons to enter these hearts, but they're literally telling Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael, the archangels, to get out.
It's a total inversion. It's a deliberate, aggressive deconstruction of the sacred. But look at the context the author provides right after this gruesome scene. He moves from this blood ritual straight into one of the most massive historical glitches in the occult record, the Taxil hoax.
Oh, I was waiting for this. This is where the algorithm starts to unravel.
Exactly. We've talked about how the occult revival fueled this massive public anxiety about satanic conspiracies. But here, the author shows us that the conspiracy was actually a meticulously engineered prank by a man named Gabriel Jogend Haanaan, better known as Leo Taxil.
It's like finding out the secret society you've been afraid of is actually just a very dedicated theater troupe.
Precisely. The author describes how, in 1897, Taxil stepped onto a stage in Paris. The room was packed with Catholics, Masons, journalists, everyone waiting for the revelation of this high priestess, Diana Vaughan. And instead of a priestess, out walks Taxil himself, looking very prim with his pince-nez. He stands there and basically says, "Everything you thought was a dark satanic conspiracy, I made it up. I even tricked my friend, Dr. Batali, into writing a book about it just to see if I could fool you."
That is such a massive wait what moment for the history of the era. He basically admitted to gaslighting an entire continent.
And he wasn't just joking about the theology. He was mocking the very idea of the unseen. He tells the crowd that people were so desperate to find meaning in the shadows that they believe anything, even that a bishop would be moved to tears by a fake conversion.
It's so cynical yet so brilliant. He even mentions how he used a mystification technique. Like a chef preparing a suckling pig, he says. A good suckling pig is born, not cooked.
He's claiming the prank was an art form, but there's a cost. The author points out that while Taxil succeeded in dismantling the fear of Satanism, he also stripped it of its dark enchantment. He broke the spell.
Yeah, he turned the sublime into a joke. You can't have the mystery anymore if you know the magician is just a guy in a costume holding a fake wand.
Right. And that leads us into this next phase of the book, this golden autumn of occultism, the era of the grand doctrinal systems like Madame Blavatsky's, where the magic became more about theories of everything and less about, well, cutting hearts.
From blood rituals to heavy textbooks. It's a strange evolution, isn't it? From the visceral to the intellectual.
It's the shift from the ritualistic to the systemic. Let's look at how these new doctrines tried to claim they were the true source of all ancient wisdom. So, we've moved past the great prank of Taxil and into what feels like a massive expansion pack for this whole era. The author is listing these groups, the Society and Tours, the Martinists under Papus. It's almost overwhelming how many different branches were sprouting at once.
It sounds less like a single movement and more like an entire ecosystem. Like everything was just multiplying?
Exactly, and look at this specific detail about the Martinist Lodge Harmonibus. They had these incredibly precise ritual times, Sundays between 2 and 3, Wednesdays between 10 and 11 p.m. But they weren't there to do anything dark or even particularly weird if you compare it to that heart-cutting scene from earlier. Their goal was simply to focus on love and pray for healing through Christ.
That's such a sharp pivot from the violence we saw before. One minute it's blood rituals, the next it's quite pious, almost conventional. Though I see he mentions them spreading everywhere, even St. Petersburg. This thing wasn't staying in France. It was going global by 1910.
Yeah, but then the text takes us somewhere much weirder. Look at this description of Pierre Gaillard watching a ceremony in Paris around 1939. He says he felt like he was being hunted by Satanists who were casting spells against him. So his friend tells him, go see this priest.
Wait, let me see this. Oh my God. Seth, this is intense. It describes an altar made out of a dresser pushed against a wall, covered in red cloth. And the priest?
The priest is barefooted under long robes with a huge white cross hanging below his waist. It literally calls it the crucifixion of the phallus.
Okay, that is not your standard Sunday service. And they are using champagne glasses for wine and broken wafers burned in candlelight? That's so incredibly DIY. Like occultism on a budget.
But look how deep it goes. There's this moment where the priest performs an exorcism on Gaillard, chanting formulas even Gaillard couldn't understand, just breaking bread over fire and saying, "This is the communion of bread and fire." It feels less like organized religion and more like something primal, something left over from much older traditions.
Which makes sense, because if you look back at what we discussed earlier about the spiritual algorithm, the idea that these guys were coding reality, this looks like the old code resurfacing. Even as all these big structured orders like the Martinists or the Rosicrucians were trying to be formal and academic, you still have these little pockets of raw, visceral practice happening in fourth-floor apartments in Paris.
Right. The author actually ties us into a really somber point toward the end. He says that while everything was flourishing before various crises, when the crisis finally arrives, specifically World War I, it stops. This whole era ends with the Holocaust of the Great War. All those key figures? Dead by 1918. Papus, Peladan. They didn't survive the transition to the modern world.
So the fever broke because there was nothing left to burn. That's heavy. But then he shifts gears one last time for an appendix on Crowley, and suddenly, it gets personal again.
Yeah, the connection between Eliphas Levi and Aleister Crowley is where the history turns into something almost supernatural. We mentioned earlier how Crowley claimed to be Levi's reincarnation. Now we see his evidence, shared biographical parallels, even specific memories of places in Paris.
It goes beyond just feeling a vibe. Look at this bit from the margins of Crowley's notes. There's this story about Levi saving his dying daughter by breathing life into her lungs through ritual, and Crowley writes right next to it, compare saving Lola Zaza. His own daughter survived exactly the same way.
At this point, you have to wonder if it's coincidence or if some part of that original code, that spiritual imprint, really did pass from person to person as the author suggests. Whether it's true or not, whether it's magic or just a very intense psychological echo.
It certainly makes the history feel much less like a textbook and much more like a ghost story.
It really does. We started this journey looking at the architect Levi, trying to even map out the logic of the unseen, and we ended it in the middle of a ghost story, watching the shadows of the 19th century bleed directly into the 20th.
It's been such a wild ride. We've gone from the high poetic ambitions of Rimbaud and Hugo, through the absolute chaos of the Taxil hoax, to that raw DIY ritualism in the backstreets of Paris. It's like we've been tracing the pulse of an era that was simultaneously trying to build a new science of the soul and losing itself in its own fever dreams.
Exactly. And looking back at the whole book, the through line is so clear. It's about the struggle to find structure in the sublime. Whether it was through complex alchemical poetry or the massive organized lodges of the Martinists, there was this desperate, beautiful attempt to turn the chaos of human experience into something programmable, something meaningful.
Even if that program sometimes involved a few too many broken wafers and champagne glasses. But there's something so deeply human about it. That drive to find the pattern in the dark, even when the pattern is just a well-executed prank.
A very well-executed one indeed. Well, we have reached the final page. We've closed the book on this particular era of the spiritual algorithm, and as the Great War took the architects away, the code itself changed forever.
It's been a pleasure exploring these shadows with you, Seth. I feel like I need a long yoga session and some heavy percussion just to shake off the weight of all that history.
And I think I'll just sit with the silence for a bit. Maybe play a few notes on the jaw harp to settle the energy.
Thank you all for listening and walking through these archives with us.
Until next time, goodbye everyone.